The Setting Sun. Osamu Dazai. 1. One morning in the dining room, Mother took a spoonful of soup and let out a faint, almost ghostly cry. "Oh. A hair?" I asked, thinking something unpleasant had found its way into her soup. "No," she replied, and as if nothing had happened, she elegantly took another spoonful, turned her head gracefully towards the kitchen window, her gaze fixed on the mountain cherry blossoms in full bloom. With her face still turned, she elegantly lifted another spoonful to her small lips. To say she moved elegantly is no exaggeration in Mother's case. Her manner of eating was utterly different from the etiquette depicted in women's magazines. My younger brother, Naoji, once said to me over drinks, "Having a title doesn't make you an aristocrat. Some people are natural aristocrats, even without titles. And then there are those like us, who have titles but are closer to commoners, if not outright rabble. Take Iwashima," he said, mentioning a count who was a classmate of his. "He's more vulgar than a pimp in Shinjuku." The other day, at Yanai's older brother's wedding, he mentioned the name of a viscount's second son, another classmate. That fool showed up in a tuxedo. Why a tuxedo? Well, never mind that. But during his table speech, the idiot used the preposterous word gozaimasuru. I was stunned. Putting on airs has nothing to do with being refined. It's just pathetic posturing. You often see signs around Hongo that say high-class boarding house, but in reality, most of the nobility are nothing more than high-class beggars. True aristocrats don't put on airs like Iwashima. In our family, the only real aristocrat is probably Mother. She's the real deal. There's something special about her. Even the way Mother ate her soup was different. We would incline our heads slightly over the plate, hold the spoon sideways to scoop the soup, and then bring it to our mouths still sideways. But Mother, resting the fingers of her left hand lightly on the edge of the table, held her head high without stooping, scooped the soup with her spoon held sideways without even glancing at the plate, and then, with a movement I can only describe as swift and graceful, like a swallow, brought the spoon to her mouth, turning it perpendicular. Then, seemingly lost in thought, she would glance around absently, wielding the spoon lightly, like a tiny wing, never spilling a drop, never making a slurping sound or clinking the spoon against the plate. While it might not have been the so-called proper etiquette, to me, it seemed utterly charming, truly authentic. And indeed, somehow, sipping a drink in that manner makes it taste remarkably better. But I, being one of those high-class beggars Naoji talks about, couldn't handle a spoon with Mother's effortless grace. Resigned, I bowed my head over my plate and ate my soup in the gloomy, prescribed manner. Mother's disregard for etiquette wasn't limited to soup. When meat was served, she would quickly cut it into small pieces with her knife and fork, then set aside the knife, switch the fork to her right hand, and spear each morsel with it, savoring it slowly. And when we struggled to separate the meat from the bone of a chicken leg without clinking our plates, Mother would casually pick it up with her fingers, separate the meat from the bone with her teeth, and continue without a care. Such uncouth behavior, when Mother did it, was not only charming but strangely erotic. It truly showed that she was different. It wasn't just with chicken legs. Sometimes she even ate luncheon meats like ham and sausages by picking them up with her fingers. "Do you know why rice balls are so delicious?" she once asked. "It's because they're shaped by human hands." I, too, sometimes think that eating with one's hands must be delicious, but I refrain, fearing that if a high-class beggar like myself were to imitate her, I would truly resemble a common beggar. Even my brother Naoji admitted he couldn't match Mother. I, too, find it impossible to imitate her, and sometimes I even feel a sense of despair. One beautiful moonlit night in early autumn, Mother and I were moon viewing in the gazebo by the pond in the garden of our house in Nishikatamakai. As we were laughing and discussing the differences between the wedding preparations of a fox bride and a mouse bride, Mother suddenly stood up and went behind the bush clover thicket beside the gazebo. Then, her face, whiter than the white bush clover blossoms, appeared from within, and she said with a smile, "Kazuko, guess what Mother is doing right now?" "Picking flowers," I replied. She let out a small laugh and said, "Peeing." I was surprised that she wasn't even squatting, but there was something genuinely charming about it, something I could never imitate. I've digressed quite a bit from the soup incident this morning. But the other day, I read in a book that the noble women of the Louis dynasty would relieve themselves without a care in the palace gardens or even in the corners of hallways. Their unconcern seemed genuinely charming, and I wondered if my mother wasn't the last of such true noblewomen anyway. This morning, after taking a sip of soup, she let out a small "oh," and when I asked, "A hair?" she replied, "No." Was it too salty? I had made the soup myself, using canned green peas from the recent American aid shipment, pureeing them and trying to make something like a pottage. I lacked confidence in my cooking, so even when Mother said no, I anxiously persisted. "It's delicious," Mother said earnestly, finishing her soup. Then she picked up a rice ball wrapped in seaweed with her fingers and ate it. Since childhood, I've never had much of an appetite in the morning, and I don't feel hungry until around 10 o'clock. This morning, I managed to finish my soup, but I didn't feel like eating anything else. I put the rice ball on my plate, stuck my chopsticks in it, mashed it into a mush, and then picked up a small piece with my chopsticks. Imitating the way Mother held her spoon when eating soup, I held my chopsticks perpendicular to my mouth and pushed the food in as if feeding a baby bird. As I was slowly eating, Mother finished her meal, stood up quietly, leaned against the sunlit wall, and watched me eat in silence for a while. "You're not there yet, Kazuko. You must learn to enjoy breakfast the most." "Do you enjoy it, Mother?" "Of course. I'm not an invalid." "I'm not an invalid either." "No, no," Mother said, shaking her head with a sad smile. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with tuberculosis and confined to bed, but I knew it was just a psychosomatic illness. Mother's recent illness, however, was truly worrisome, a sad illness. Yet, Mother was only worried about me. "Oh," I said. "What?" Mother asked this time. We looked at each other, and I felt a sense of complete understanding between us. I chuckled, and Mother smiled gently. That strange, faint cry of "oh" escapes me when I'm overcome by an unbearable sense of shame. Just now, the memory of my divorce 6 years ago suddenly flashed vividly in my mind, and I couldn't help but let out that "oh." But what about Mother? Surely, Mother didn't have such a shameful past as mine. Or did she? You just remembered something too, didn't you, Mother? What was it? I've forgotten. About me? No. About Naoji? Yes, she started to say, then tilted her head. Maybe. Naoji was drafted in the middle of college and sent to an island in the South Pacific. We lost contact with him, and even after the war ended, his whereabouts remained unknown. Mother said she had resigned herself to never seeing him again, but I never resigned myself to such a thing. I was certain we would meet again. I thought I had given up hope, but having this delicious soup made me think of Naoji, and I was overcome with emotion. I should have been kinder to him. Ever since he entered high school, Naoji became obsessed with literature and started living like a delinquent, causing Mother endless worry. Yet, with each spoonful of soup, she thought of Naoji and let out an "oh." I pushed the rice into my mouth, my eyes welling up. "He'll be all right. Naoji will be all right. A scoundrel like him doesn't die easily. It's always the quiet, beautiful, and kind ones who die," I said. "Naoji wouldn't die even if you beat him with a stick." Mother laughed. "So, you'll die young, then," she teased. "Of course not. I'm as tough as nails, so I'll live to be 80. "Really? Then, Mother will live to be 90. "Yes," I started to say, then hesitated. "Scoundrels live long. Beautiful people die young. Mother was beautiful. But I wanted her to live a long life." I was utterly confused. "You're being mean," I blurted out. My lower lip trembled, and tears streamed down my face. "Shall I tell you about the snakes?" 4 or 5 days before, the neighborhood children found about 10 snake eggs in the bamboo grove by the garden fence. The children insisted they were viper eggs. I couldn't bear the thought of 10 vipers hatching in the bamboo grove, making it impossible to even step into the garden, so I said, "Let's burn them." The children jumped with joy and followed me. We piled up leaves and twigs near the bamboo grove, set them on fire, and threw the eggs in one by one. They didn't burn easily. Even when the children piled more leaves and small branches onto the flames to intensify the fire, the eggs showed no sign of burning. A farmer's daughter called from beyond the hedge, "What are you doing?" She was laughing. "We're burning viper eggs. We're afraid of vipers." "How big are they?" "About the size of quail eggs, and pure white." "Then, they're just ordinary snake eggs, not viper eggs." "Raw eggs don't burn easily." The daughter laughed, seemingly amused, and left. We kept the fire going for about 30 minutes, but the eggs wouldn't burn. So, I had the children retrieve the eggs from the fire and bury them under the plum tree. Then I gathered some pebbles and made a grave marker. Now, everyone, let's pray, I said, kneeling and putting my hands together. The children obediently knelt behind me and seemed to do the same. After parting with the children, as I was slowly climbing the stone steps, I saw Mother standing in the shade of the wisteria trellis at the top. "You're a cruel person," she said. "I thought they were vipers, but they were just ordinary snakes. But I buried them properly, so it's all right," I said, "but I thought I had been caught red-handed." Mother wasn't superstitious, but ever since Father passed away 10 years ago in our Nishikatamakai house, she had become terribly afraid of snakes. Just before Father's death, Mother saw a thin black string on the floor by his bedside. When she casually reached down to pick it up, it turned out to be a snake. It quickly slithered away, out into the hallway, and disappeared. Only Mother and Uncle Wada witnessed this, and they exchanged glances but kept silent so as not to cause a commotion in the death chamber. We were also present, but we knew nothing about the snake. However, I did see with my own eyes that on the evening of Father's death, there were snakes climbing every single tree by the pond in the garden. I was 19 at the time of Father's passing 10 years ago, a grown woman, not a child. Even after 10 years, the memory remains vivid, and I'm certain I'm not mistaken. I went to the pond in the garden to cut some flowers for the offering. As I stood by the azaleas on the bank, I happened to glance up and saw a small snake coiled around a branch. Slightly startled, I reached for a branch of Keria rose to cut, and there was another snake coiled around it. There were snakes on the sweet olive, the Japanese maple, the enoki tree, the wisteria, the cherry tree. Every single tree had snakes coiled around its branches. But I wasn't particularly frightened. I felt as if the snakes, like myself, were mourning Father's passing, and had crawled out of their holes to pay their respects to his spirit. Later, I quietly told Mother about the snakes in the garden. She seemed to calm down, tilted her head slightly as if in thought, but didn't say anything. However, it's true that these 2 snake incidents turned Mother into a severe arphidiophobe. It was more than just a phobia. She seemed to have developed a sense of awe and fear, a reverence, towards snakes. Mother had seen me burning the snake eggs, and I was sure she must have felt a deep sense of foreboding. I, too, suddenly felt as if burning those eggs had been a terrible, frightening act, and I worried that it might bring some kind of curse upon Mother. I couldn't forget about it for days afterward. Then, this morning, I blurted out the thoughtless remark about beautiful people dying young and couldn't take it back, bursting into tears. As I was clearing the breakfast table, I felt as if a nasty little snake had slithered into my heart, threatening Mother's life. I felt disgusted and uneasy. Then, that day, I saw a snake in the garden. It was a beautiful, peaceful day, so after finishing my kitchen chores, I decided to do some knitting in the garden. I carried a wicker chair down to the lawn. As I was approaching the spot where I had intended to sit, I saw a snake near the bamboo grass by a garden stone. Oh, how disgusting, I thought, but nothing more. I simply turned back with the chair, climbed back onto the veranda, placed the chair there, and began to knit. In the afternoon, I decided to fetch a book of Lawrence's paintings from the library stored in the back of the small temple at the corner of the garden. As I walked down into the garden, I saw a snake slowly slithering across the lawn. It was the same snake from this morning. A slender, elegant snake. I thought it was a female. She silently crossed the lawn to the shade of a wild rose bush, stopped, raised her head, and flicked her slender, flame-like tongue. She seemed to be surveying her surroundings. After a while, she lowered her head and curled up, looking melancholic. Even then, I only felt that she was a beautiful snake. I went to the temple, fetched the art book, and on my way back, I glanced at the spot where the snake had been, but she was gone towards evening. As Mother and I were having tea in the Chinese-style room, looking out at the garden, the snake from this morning reappeared, slowly slithering onto the 3rd step of the stone staircase. Mother saw it too. "That snake," she murmured, then stood up and rushed towards me, grabbing my hand. Hearing her words, I suddenly realized something. The mother of the eggs. I blurted out. Yes, yes. Mother's voice was faint. We stood hand in hand, holding our breath, silently watching the snake. The snake, which had been curled up melancholically on the stone, began to move again, slithering feebly across the stone steps and disappearing into the irises. "She's been wandering around the garden since this morning," I whispered. Mother sighed and sank into a chair. Hasn't she? She's looking for her eggs. Poor thing, she said in a despondent voice. I forced a chuckle. The setting sun illuminated Mother's face, making her eyes appear almost blue. Her subtly angry expression was so beautiful, it made me want to embrace her. And then, it struck me, Mother's face resembled that of the sad snake. And I felt, for some inexplicable reason, as if the viper that lived inside me, a grotesque, writhing creature, would one day devour this beautiful, deeply saddened mother snake. I placed my hand on Mother's soft, delicate shoulder and shuddered involuntarily. We left our house in Nishikatamakai, Tokyo, and moved to this slightly Chinese-style villa in Aizu at the beginning of December, the year Japan surrendered unconditionally. After Father's death, our family's finances were managed entirely by Mother's younger brother, Uncle Wada, her only remaining relative. But after the war, the world changed. Uncle Wada told Mother that things were no longer sustainable, that selling the house was the only option, that we should let go of all the servants, and that the two of us should buy a nice little house in the countryside and live a peaceful life. Mother, who understood even less about money than a child, apparently agreed to Uncle Wada's proposal and asked him to make the arrangements. At the end of November, we received an express letter from Uncle Wada. He wrote that Viscount Kawata's villa along the Suanzu railway line was for sale. The house was on a hill with a good view and came with about 100 tsubo of farmland. The area was famous for its plum blossoms, warm in winter and cool in summer, a place we would surely enjoy. He suggested that since we would need to meet with the seller directly, we should come to his office in Ginza the following day. Mother, will you go? I asked. Well, I asked him to take care of it, she replied with a terribly sad smile. The next day, accompanied by our former chauffeur, Mr. Matsuyama, Mother left the house a little after noon and returned around 8 o'clock that evening, again with Mr. Matsuyama. I've decided, she said, entering my room, leaning against my desk, and collapsing into a chair. Decided what? Everything. But, I was surprised. You haven't even seen the house. Mother propped her elbow on the desk, lightly touched her forehead, and sighed softly. Uncle Wada says it's a nice place. I feel as if I could close my eyes and move there right now, she said, lifting her face and giving a faint smile. Her face was slightly gaunt and beautiful. I see, I replied, won over by the beauty of Mother's trust in Uncle Wada. Then, I'll close my eyes too. We both laughed aloud, but after the laughter subsided, a deep sadness settled upon us. From the next day on, movers came to the house every day to pack our belongings. Uncle Wada also came and made arrangements for selling the items we were leaving behind. Okume, the maid, and I were busy sorting through clothes, burning trash in the garden, and so on. But Mother didn't help with the packing or give any instructions. She just spent her days in her room, listless and melancholic. What's wrong? Don't you want to go to Aizu anymore? I ventured to ask, a bit sternly. No, she replied with a vacant expression. After about 10 days, the packing was almost complete. One evening, as Okume and I were burning waste paper and straw in the garden, Mother came out of her room, stood on the veranda, and silently watched our bonfire. A cold, grey west wind was blowing, and the smoke crept low along the ground. I looked up at Mother's face and was shocked by how pale she looked, paler than I'd ever seen her. Mother, you look terrible. I cried. Mother smiled faintly. It's nothing, she said, and quietly returned to her room. That night, since the bedding had already been packed, Okume slept on the sofa in the second-floor Western-style room. Mother and I shared a single futon borrowed from our neighbor, laid out on the floor of Mother's room. In a weak voice that made me wonder if she was all right, Mother said, I'm going to Aizu because of you, Kazuko. Because you'll be with me. Her words surprised me. What if I weren't with you? I blurted out. Mother burst into tears. I would rather die. I want to die in this house where Father passed away, she sobbed, her voice breaking. Mother had never shown such weakness to me before, never cried so uncontrollably in my presence. Not when Father died, not when I got married, not when I returned home pregnant, not when my baby was stillborn, not when I was ill and bedridden, not even when Naoji misbehaved. For 10 years after Father's death, Mother had remained the same cheerful, kind mother she had always been. And we had taken advantage of her kindness, growing up spoiled. But Mother had no money left. She had spent everything on us, on Naoji and me, without a second thought. And now, she had to leave this house where she had lived for so many years and start a lonely new life in a small villa in Aizu, with just me. If Mother had been selfish and stingy, if she had scolded us and secretly saved money for herself, she wouldn't be feeling this way, this despair that made her want to die. For the first time, I realized the terrifying, wretched, hopeless hell that poverty could be. My heart was so full of anguish that I couldn't even cry. Was this the solemnity of life? Lying on my back, motionless, I felt like a stone. The next day, Mother was still pale and continued to linger in the house as if she wanted to stay as long as possible. But Uncle Wada came and told us that since almost everything had been shipped, we were leaving for Aizu that day. Mother reluctantly put on her coat, silently bowed to Okume and the other people who had come to say goodbye, and the three of us, Uncle Wada, Mother, and I, left our house in Nishikatamakai. The train was relatively empty, and we all found seats. Uncle Wada was in exceptionally high spirits, even humming a tune. But Mother was pale, her head bowed, looking very cold. We changed to the Suanzu Railway at Mishima, got off at Izunagaoka, and took a bus for about 15 minutes. Then we walked up a gentle slope towards the mountains. There was a small village, and at the edge of the village, we found the Chinese-style villa, a rather elaborate structure. Mother, it's nicer than I expected, I said breathlessly. Yes, Mother replied, standing before the villa's entrance, her eyes momentarily brightening. The air is wonderful. So clean, Uncle Wada said proudly. Indeed, Mother smiled. Delicious. The air here is delicious, she said. We all laughed. Inside the entrance hall, our luggage from Tokyo had already arrived, filling the entrance and the rooms. The view from the living room is splendid, Uncle Wada said excitedly, leading us to the living room and having us sit down. It was around 3 in the afternoon, and the winter sun shone softly on the lawn in the garden. There was a small pond at the bottom of the stone steps leading down from the lawn, surrounded by many plum trees. Below the garden stretched a mandarin orange grove, then a village road, and beyond that, rice paddies. Further still, there was a pine forest, and beyond the pine forest, the sea. From the living room, the horizon appeared to touch the tips of my breasts. What a gentle landscape, Mother murmured melancholically. Is it the air? The sunlight is completely different from Tokyo. The light seems filtered through silk, I said excitedly. The villa had a 10-mat room, a 6-mat room, a Chinese-style reception room, a 3-mat entrance hall, another 3-mat room by the bathroom, a dining room and kitchen, and upstairs, a guest room with a large bed. It wasn't a large house, but it seemed spacious enough for the 2 of us, or even 3, if Naoji were to return. Uncle Wada went to the only inn in the village to arrange for our meals. We ate the delivered bento boxes in the living room, and Uncle Wada drank the whiskey he had brought with him, recounting humorous anecdotes from his time carousing with Viscount Kawata, the previous owner of the villa, in China. He was in high spirits, but Mother barely touched her bento box. As dusk fell, she said in a small voice, I'd like to lie down for a while. I unpacked a futon and helped her lie down. Growing increasingly worried, I found a thermometer in the luggage and took her temperature. It was 39 degrees Celsius. Uncle Wada also seemed alarmed and immediately went down to the village to find a doctor. Mother, I called, but she was just dozing. I held her small hand and sobbed. I felt so sorry for Mother, so sorry for the 2 of us. I couldn't stop crying. As I cried, I truly wished I could die with Mother right then and there. We needed nothing more. I felt our lives had ended the moment we left our house in Nishikatamakai. About 2 hours later, Uncle Wada returned with the village doctor. The doctor was quite elderly, wearing a Sendai Hira hakama and white tabi socks. After the examination, he said, it could develop into pneumonia. But even if it does, there's no need to worry. His words seemed unconvincing. He gave her an injection and left. Mother's fever persisted the following day. Uncle Wada gave me 2,000 yen, told me to send a telegram to Tokyo if she needed to be hospitalized, and returned to the city. I unpacked the minimum necessary cooking utensils and made some rice porridge for Mother. Still half asleep, she ate 3 spoonfuls and then shook her head. A little before noon, the village doctor came again. This time, he wasn't wearing her kama, but he still had on his white tabi. Wouldn't it be better if she were hospitalized? I suggested. No, there's no need for that. I'll give her a stronger injection today, and the fever should go down, he replied, his words still unconvincing. He gave her the so-called stronger injection and left. Whether it was due to the stronger injection or not, Mother's face flushed crimson that afternoon, and she began to sweat profusely. As I was changing her nightgown, she smiled and said, "He might be a brilliant doctor after all." Her temperature had dropped to 37 degrees. Overjoyed, I rushed to the only inn in the village and asked the proprietress, Osaki, for a dozen eggs. I immediately soft-boiled them and offered them to Mother. She ate 3 soft-boiled eggs and half a bowl of rice porridge. The next day, the famed village doctor came again, still wearing his white tabi. When I thanked him for yesterday's potent injection, he nodded deeply, as if its effectiveness was a matter of course. He carefully examined Mother, then turned to me and said, "Madam is no longer ill. Therefore, she may eat and do as she pleases." His peculiar way of speaking made it difficult for me to suppress a laugh. I saw the doctor to the door. When I returned to the living room, Mother was sitting up in bed. "He truly is a brilliant doctor. I'm no longer ill," she said with a cheerful expression, as if talking to herself in a daze. "Mother, shall I open the shoji screen?" "It's snowing," I said. Large, petal-like snowflakes were beginning to fall softly. I opened the shoji and sat beside Mother, gazing at the Aizu snow through the glass door. "I'm no longer ill," Mother repeated, as if to herself. "Sitting here like this, it feels as if everything before was a dream. Just before we moved, I really didn't want to come to Aizu. I wanted to stay in our Nishika Tamakai house for even one more day, even half a day. When I got on the train, I felt half dead. When we arrived here, I felt a fleeting moment of joy, but as dusk fell, I longed for Tokyo so intensely that it felt as if my heart were burning. I felt faint. It wasn't an ordinary illness. God took my life, and then, He resurrected me as a different person, the person I am today. And so, our quiet life in the villa, just the two of us, continued peacefully until today. The villagers were kind to us. We moved here last December, and it's now April. During these months, December, January, February, March, and now April, aside from preparing meals, we mostly spent our time knitting on the veranda, reading in the Chinese-style room, having tea. We lived almost completely detached from the world. In February, the plum blossoms bloomed, and the entire village was buried in their blossoms. Since March was mostly calm and windless, the plum blossoms remained in full bloom, their beauty undiminished until the end of the month. Morning, noon, evening, night, the plum blossoms were breathtakingly beautiful. Whenever we opened the glass door on the veranda, the fragrance of the blossoms would waft into the room. Towards the end of March, the wind picked up every evening. As I was setting the table in the dining room at dusk, plum petals would blow in through the window and land in the rice bowls, getting them wet. In April, as Mother and I sat on the veranda knitting, our conversations revolved mostly around plans for the vegetable garden. Mother said she wanted to help. Writing this all down, it seems as if we truly died and were resurrected as different people, as Mother had said. But perhaps a resurrection like Jesus is ultimately impossible for humans. Despite what she said, Mother still thinks of Naoji with every spoonful of soup and lets out an "oh." And the scars of my past haven't healed at all. I want to write everything clearly, without hiding anything. Sometimes, I even feel that the peace of this villa is all a pretense, a facade. Even if this were a brief respite granted to us by God, I can't shake the feeling that something ominous, a dark shadow, is creeping towards us. Mother, despite feigning happiness, grows weaker by the day. And within my heart, a viper dwells, growing fatter and fatter at Mother's expense, no matter how I try to suppress it. Oh, I wish this were just a seasonal thing. Lately, I sometimes find this life unbearable. Burning the snake eggs must have been one manifestation of my restlessness. And it only served to deepen Mother's sadness and weaken her further. I wrote the word love, and then I couldn't write any more. Point 2. About 10 days after the snake egg incident, a series of unfortunate events deepened Mother's sadness and further weakened her. I started a fire. I, of all people, started a fire. Never in my life had I imagined such a terrifying thing could happen. Was I so much of a princess that I was oblivious to the simple fact that carelessness with fire can cause a fire? I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. As I walked towards the entrance hall, I noticed a light coming from the bathroom. I casually glanced inside and saw that the glass door of the bathroom was glowing red, and I could hear a crackling sound. I hurried over, slid open the bathroom door, stepped outside barefoot, and saw that the pile of firewood next to the bathroom furnace was ablaze. I ran to the neighboring farmhouse downhill, banged on the door with all my might, and shouted, "Mr. Nokai, wake up! Fire!" Mr. Nokai, who seemed to have been asleep, replied, "Yes, I'm coming," and before I could finish saying, "Please hurry. Please," he rushed out of his house in his yukata nightclothes. We ran back to the fire and started throwing buckets of water from the pond onto the flames. Then I heard Mother's scream, "Ah!" from the direction of the living room. I dropped the bucket, ran up the stone steps from the garden to the veranda, caught Mother as she was about to collapse, and said, "Mother, don't worry. It's all right. Please rest." I helped her back to bed, then rushed back to the fire. This time, I drew water from the bath and handed the buckets to Mr. Nokai, who threw the water onto the burning woodpile. But the fire was intense and showed no sign of dying down. Fire! Fire! The villa is on fire! Voices rose from downhill, and in no time, 4 or 5 villagers broke through the hedge and rushed to help. They formed a bucket brigade, drawing water from the irrigation ditch at the bottom of the hedge, and managed to extinguish the fire in a matter of minutes. The flames had almost reached the roof of the bathroom. Just as I felt relieved, I realized the cause of the fire and was horrified. It was then, and only then, that I realized the fire had started because I had taken the smoldering wood from the furnace earlier that evening, thinking I had extinguished it, and left it next to the woodpile. The realization made me want to cry. I was standing there, stunned, when I heard Mrs. Nishiyama, the wife of our neighbor, talking loudly from beyond the hedge, "The bathroom is completely burned. Carelessness with the furnace fire." The village head, Mr. Fujita, Officer Ninomiya, and the chief of the fire brigade, Mr. Ouchi, arrived. Mr. Fujita, with his usual gentle smile, asked, "You must be frightened. What happened?" "It was my fault. The firewood I thought I had extinguished," I started to say, but I felt so miserable that tears welled up, and I fell silent, hanging my head. I thought I might be taken to the police station and arrested. I suddenly felt ashamed of my disheveled appearance, barefoot and in my nightgown. I truly felt like a failure. "I understand. How is your mother?" Mr. Fujita asked softly, his voice full of concern. "She's resting in her room. She was terribly frightened." Well, said the young officer Ninomiya, "it's a good thing the house didn't catch fire." His words were comforting. Then Mr. Nokai, the farmer, returned, now properly dressed. "It was nothing, really. The firewood just smoldered a bit. It wasn't even a real fire," he said breathlessly, trying to downplay my foolish mistake. "Is that so?" "I understand," Mr. Fujita said, nodding repeatedly. He then whispered something to Officer Ninomiya. "Well then, we'll be going. Please give our best to your mother," he said, and left with Mr. Ouchi and the others. Only Officer Ninomiya remained. He walked up to me and said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "I won't officially report this incident tonight." After Officer Ninomiya left, Mr. Nokai asked anxiously, his voice tense, "What did Officer Ninomiya say?" "He said he wouldn't report it," I replied. Some neighbors were still lingering by the hedge, and they seemed to have overheard my reply. That's good," they murmured as they dispersed. Mr. Nokai also said good night and left. I stood alone by the charred remains of the woodpile, tears in my eyes, and looked up at the sky, which was already showing the first signs of dawn. I washed my hands, feet, and face in the bathroom. I felt apprehensive about facing Mother, so I lingered in the 3-mat room by the bathroom, fixing my hair. Then I went to the kitchen and busied myself rearranging the dishes, even though there was no need, until dawn finally broke when I quietly tiptoed to the living room. Mother was already dressed, sitting wearily in a chair in the Chinese-style room. She saw me and smiled gently, but her face was shockingly pale. I didn't smile. I just stood silently behind her chair. After a while, Mother said, "It was nothing, really. It was just firewood, meant to be burned." I suddenly felt cheerful and chuckled. I remembered the proverb from the Bible, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver," and I felt deeply grateful to God for giving me such a kind mother. Last night was last night. I wouldn't dwell on it anymore. I gazed at the morning sea of Izu through the glass door of the Chinese-style room, standing behind Mother for a long time, until our quiet breaths synchronized. After a light breakfast, I began clearing the charred remains of the woodpile. Osaki, the proprietress of the only inn in the village, came rushing through the garden gate, saying, "What happened? What happened? I just heard about it. What on earth happened last night?" Her eyes were glistening with tears. "I'm so sorry," I apologized softly. "Don't worry about that. More importantly, miss, what about the police? They said it's all right." "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her face beaming with genuine relief. I asked Osaki how I should express my gratitude and apologies to the villagers. She said money would be the most appropriate and told me which families I should visit. "But if you don't want to go around by yourself, I can accompany you. Wouldn't it be better if I went alone? Can you manage it by yourself?" "Yes, it would be better if you went alone. I'll go alone." Osaki then helped me clear the charred remains. After finishing the cleanup, I received some money from mother and wrapped 100 yen bills in Mino paper, writing apologies on each packet. First, I went to the village office. Mr. Fujita, the village head, was out, so I handed the packet to the young woman at the reception desk and said, "I'm so sorry for what happened last night. I'll be more careful from now on. Please forgive me. Please give my best to Mr. Fujita." Then I went to Mr. Ouchi's house, the chief of the fire brigade. Mr. Ouchi came to the door, looked at me, and smiled sadly. I suddenly felt like crying. "I'm so sorry about last night," I managed to say, and quickly excused myself. Tears streamed down my face as I walked home. My face was a mess, so I went back to the villa, washed my face in the bathroom, reapplied my makeup, and was about to leave again when mother came to the entrance hall. "Are you going somewhere else?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Thank you for your effort," she said softly. Encouraged by mother's affection, I managed to complete my rounds without crying again. I went to the district head's house, but he was out, and his daughter-in-law came to the door. She started crying when she saw me. At the police station, Officer Ninomiya said, that's good. Everyone was so kind, sympathetic, and comforting. Only Mrs. Nishiyama, the wife of our neighbor, a woman of about 40, scolded me relentlessly. "Be more careful from now on. I don't know if you think you're some kind of princess or what, but I've been watching your playhouse lifestyle with growing unease. You too live like children. It's a wonder you haven't started a fire before. Really, be more careful from now on. If the wind had been stronger last night, the whole village would have burned down." This was the same Mrs. Nishiyama who had been standing outside the hedge during the fire, saying loudly, "The bathroom is completely burned. Carelessness with the furnace fire," while Mr. Nokai, the farmer, had rushed to my defense in front of Mr. Fujita and Officer Ninomiya, saying it wasn't even a real fire. But I felt there was truth in Mrs. Nishiyama's scolding. She was right. I didn't resent her at all. Mother had joked that it was just firewood, meant to be burned, and tried to comfort me. But if the wind had been stronger, as Mrs. Nishiyama said, the whole village might have burned down. If that had happened, I wouldn't have been able to atone for it even with my life. If I had died, mother wouldn't have been able to live either, and it would have brought shame upon our deceased father's name. There are no more princesses or nobility now, but if we are to perish, I want us to perish gloriously. Dying to atone for a fire, such a pathetic end, wouldn't bring me peace even in death. I had to pull myself together. From the following day, I devoted myself to working in the vegetable garden. Mr. Nokai's daughter would occasionally come to help. After the humiliating fire incident, I felt as if the blood in my body had become darker, as if the viper of malice in my heart had tainted it. I felt myself becoming more like a coarse, unrefined country girl. Even when I was with mother on the veranda, knitting, I felt strangely constrained and suffocated. I felt more at ease working in the garden, digging in the soil. Manual labor, is that what it's called? This kind of physical work wasn't new to me. During the war, I was conscripted and even made to do yoitomake, hauling dirt. The work tabi I wore in the garden were issued to me by the military at that time. That was the first time in my life I wore tabi. I was surprised by how comfortable they were. Walking in the garden wearing them, I felt as if I understood the light-heartedness of birds and animals walking barefoot on the earth. It filled me with an almost painful joy. That's my only pleasant memory from the war. Come to think of it, the war was such a dreary affair. Last year, there was nothing. The year before last, there was nothing. The year before that, 2. There was nothing. That's a funny poem that appeared in a newspaper right after the war ended. Now that I think about it, while it feels as if various things happened, it also feels as if there was nothing at all. I dislike talking about or listening to war stories. So many people died, yet it's all so banal and tedious. But am I being selfish? The time I was conscripted, wore tabi, and did yoitomake, that's the one war memory that doesn't seem quite so banal. While there were certainly unpleasant moments, I became much stronger physically thanks to that yoitomake. Even now, I sometimes think that if I were ever in dire straits, I could make a living doing yoitomake. As the war situation grew increasingly desperate, a man in a military uniform came to our house in Nishikatamakai and handed me a conscription notice and a work schedule. The schedule indicated that I would have to travel to a mountain beyond Tachikawa every other day, starting the next day. Tears welled up in my eyes. Can't someone take my place? I asked, sobbing uncontrollably. You were conscripted by the military, so you must go in person, the man replied firmly. I resolved to go the next day. It rained. We were lined up at the foot of the mountain in Tachikawa and listened to a lecture by an officer. We will win this war, he began. We will definitely win, but if you don't work as instructed by the military, it will hinder our operations, and we'll end up like Okinawa. I expect you to fulfill your assigned tasks. Also, there might be spies infiltrating this mountain, so be vigilant. From now on, you will be working inside a military zone, just like soldiers, so be very careful not to disclose anything about what you see there. Rain shrouded the mountain in mist. Nearly 500 conscripted workers, men and women, stood in the rain, listening to the lecture. Among them were elementary school students, boys and girls, their faces tear-stained and shivering with cold. The rain seeped through my raincoat and soaked my outer garments, and eventually, even my underclothes were wet. That day, I spent the entire day hauling dirt in a moko carrier. On the train home, I couldn't stop crying. The next time, the task was yoitomake, pulling ropes. And I found that work the most enjoyable. After 2 or 3 trips to the mountain, the elementary school boys started staring at me intently. One day, as I was carrying a moko, a group of boys passed by, and one of them whispered, "Is she a spy?" I was taken aback. Why would they say such a thing? I asked a young woman working beside me, also carrying a moko, "Because you look like a foreigner," she replied seriously. "Do you think I'm a spy too?" "No," she replied, this time with a slight smile. "I'm Japanese," I said, but my own words sounded absurd and nonsensical, and I chuckled to myself. One fine day, I was hauling logs with the men when a young officer in charge of supervision frowned and pointed at me. "Hey, you! Come here," he said and walked briskly towards the pine forest. My heart pounded with anxiety and fear as I followed him. There was a pile of freshly cut lumber from the sawmill in the depths of the forest. The officer stopped in front of it, turned around to face me, and said with a smile, "It must be tough every day. Today, why don't you stand guard over this lumber?" "Do I just stand here? It's cool and quiet here, so why don't you take a nap on these boards? And if you get bored, you might want to read this." He took a small paperback from his breast pocket, tossed it onto the lumber pile, and said shyly, "Read this, if you like." The title on the paperback was Troika. I picked up the book and said, "Thank you. Someone in my family loves to read, too. He's in the South Pacific now." He seemed to have misheard me. "Oh, I see. Your husband. It must be tough down there in the South," he said sympathetically, shaking his head. "Anyway, today you're on guard duty here. I'll bring you your lunch later, so relax and take it easy." He turned and left quickly. I sat on the lumber and read the book. When I was about halfway through, the officer came back, the sound of his boots echoing softly. "I brought your lunch. It must be boring here all by yourself," he said, placed the lunchbox on the grass, and left again in a hurry. After finishing my lunch, I climbed onto the lumber pile, lay down, and continued reading. After finishing the book, I dozed off. I woke up a little after 3 in the afternoon. I suddenly felt as if I had seen the young officer somewhere before. I tried to remember, but I couldn't. I climbed down from the lumber, smoothed my hair, and then heard the sound of boots approaching. "Well, thank you for your hard work today. You can go home now." I ran towards the officer, intending to return the book and thank him. But I couldn't speak. I just looked up at his face. When our eyes met, tears streamed down my face. Then I saw a glint of tears in his eyes, too. We parted without a word. I never saw that young officer again. I had enjoyed a single day of leisure, and after that, I continued my arduous labor on the mountain in Tachikawa every other day. Mother worried constantly about my health, but I became stronger. I'm now a woman who's confident she can make a living doing yoitomake, and I no longer find working in the garden arduous. I said I disliked talking about or listening to war stories, yet I've gone on and on about my own precious experiences. But this is about all I can bear to share. The rest, as that poem says. Last year, there was nothing. The year before last, there was nothing. The year before that, too, there was nothing. It was all so absurd and futile. All that remains is this pair of work tabi. I've digressed again, talking about tabi. But wearing these tabi, the sole memento of the war, working in the garden day after day, I try to distract myself from the quiet anxiety and restlessness that plagues me. But mother seems to be growing noticeably weaker by the day. The snake eggs, the fire. Ever since then, mother has become noticeably more frail. And I, on the other hand, feel myself becoming increasingly coarse and unrefined. I feel as if I'm sucking the life out of mother, growing fatter and fatter at her expense. Even after the fire, mother had joked that it was just firewood, meant to be burned, and never mentioned the incident again. She even tried to comfort me. But deep down, the shock she must have experienced must have been 10 times greater than mine. Since the fire, mother sometimes moans in her sleep, and on windy nights, she pretends to go to the restroom, but instead, she wanders around the house several times during the night. Her complexion is always pale, and some days, she can barely walk. She had said she wanted to help with the garden, but after one day of carrying 5 or 6 buckets of water from the well to the garden, she complained that her shoulders were so stiff she couldn't breathe and spent the next day in bed. After that, she seemed to have given up on gardening. Even when she came to the garden, she just silently watched me work. They say people who like summer flowers die in summer. I wonder if it's true, mother said today, quietly watching me work in the garden. I silently watered the eggplants. Oh, right, it was already early summer. I like silk trees, but there isn't a single one in this garden, mother continued softly. We have plenty of oleanders, I replied, deliberately curtly. I dislike those. I usually like summer flowers, but those are too gaudy. I prefer roses. But since they bloom all year round, does that mean people who like roses have to die 4 times, once in each season? We both laughed. Shall we take a break? Mother asked, still smiling. There's something I'd like to discuss with you today. What is it? I'm not interested in talk about dying. I followed mother and we sat side by side on a bench under the wisteria trellis. The wisteria blossoms had already fallen, and the soft afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a green glow on our laps. It's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while, but I wanted to wait for the right moment, when we were both in a good mood. It's not good news, I'm afraid. But today, I feel I can talk about it calmly, so please bear with me and listen until the end. Naoji is alive. I stiffened. I received a letter from Uncle Wada a few days ago. A former employee of his company recently returned from the South Pacific and visited Uncle Wada to pay his respects. During their conversation, it came up that this man had been in the same unit as Naoji. He said Naoji was alive and would likely return home soon. But there's one unpleasant thing. According to this man, Naoji seems to have become severely addicted to opium. Again, I grimaced as if I had tasted something bitter. In high school, Naoji, imitating a certain novelist, became addicted to drugs and racked up an enormous debt at the pharmacy. It took mother 2 years to pay it off. Yes. He seems to have relapsed. But they probably won't let him return home until he's cured, so I'm sure he'll recover and come back, she continued. Uncle Wada wrote that even if he does come back cured, it wouldn't be wise to find him a job right away. Even healthy people are going a little crazy in this chaotic post-war Tokyo. A convalescing addict might easily become unstable, and who knows what he might do. So, he suggests that when Naoji returns, we should bring him straight to this villa in Aizu and keep him here for a while, without letting him go anywhere. That's one thing. And then, Kazuko. Uncle Wada has another request. He says we're completely out of money. With the frozen bank accounts and property taxes, he's no longer able to send us money like before. He says that with Naoji returning, it would be too much of a burden for him to support all three of us. So, he suggests that you either find a husband or a position in a respectable household, as soon as possible. A position? You mean as a servant? No. Uncle Wada mentioned, the one in Komaba. She mentioned the name of a certain prince. That prince is related to us by blood. Uncle Wada thinks you could serve as a companion and tutor to the princess without feeling too lonely or constrained. Is there no other work I could do? Uncle Wada said other jobs would be too much for you. Why? Tell me, why? Mother just smiled sadly and didn't answer. I don't want to. I refuse to even consider such a thing. I realized I had said something inappropriate, but I couldn't stop myself. I'm wearing these work tabi. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I burst into tears. I looked up at Mother, wiping my tears with the back of my hand, thinking I shouldn't be saying this, but the words kept tumbling out, as if they had a life of their own, separate from me. You said it yourself. You said you were going to Aizu because of me, because I would be with you. You said you would die if I weren't here. So, I've been thinking only about staying by your side, wearing these work tabi, and growing delicious vegetables for you. But now that you've heard Naoji is coming back, you suddenly want to get rid of me, send me off to be a servant for a prince. That's too much. It's just too much. I knew I was saying terrible things, but I couldn't stop. If we're poor, if we have no money left, we can sell our kimonos. We can sell this house, too. I can do anything. I can work as a clerk at the village office, anything. If they won't hire me at the office, I can do yoitomake. Poverty is nothing. As long as you love me, Mother, I've been thinking only about staying by your side forever. But you love Naoji more than me, don't you? I'm leaving. I'm leaving this house. Naoji and I have never gotten along, so if the three of us live together, we'll all be unhappy. I've lived with you alone for so long that I have no regrets. Now Naoji can live with you in peace, and he can take good care of you. I've had enough. I've had enough of this life. I'm leaving. I'm leaving right now, today. I have somewhere to go. I stood up, Kazuko. Mother said sternly. She stood up, her face filled with a dignity I had never seen before. She seemed taller than me. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I said something else. You lied to me, Mother. You used me until Naoji came back. I'm your servant. Now that you don't need me anymore, you're sending me off to the prince's house. I burst into tears, standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. You're a fool, Mother said quietly, her voice trembling with anger. I looked up and said, yes, I'm a fool. That's why I let myself be deceived. That's why I'm in the way. It's better if I'm not here, isn't it? What is poverty? What is money? I don't understand. I've lived my life believing only in your love, Mother. I blurted out another foolish, inappropriate remark. Mother turned her face away. She was crying. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, and embrace her, but I hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about my dirty hands from working in the garden. Would it be better if I weren't here? I'm leaving. I have somewhere to go, I said, and ran to the bathroom. I washed my face and hands, sobbing. Then I went to my room and changed into my Western clothes. I burst into tears again, wanting to cry and cry. I ran upstairs to the Western-style room, threw myself onto the bed, buried my face in the blanket, and sobbed until I felt faint. Then, a longing for someone, an overwhelming desire to see his face and hear his voice, came over me. It was a peculiar feeling, like having burning moxa cauterizing the soles of my feet, a pain I had to endure silently. Towards evening, Mother quietly entered the Western-style room upstairs, switched on the light, and approached the bed. Kazuko, she said softly. Yes, I replied, sitting up in bed and running my hands through my hair. I looked at Mother and chuckled. Mother smiled faintly and sank deep into the sofa by the window. For the first time in my life, I disobeyed Uncle Wada. I just wrote a letter to him. I wrote that I would take care of my children myself. Kazuko, let's sell our kimonos. Let's sell all our kimonos, splurge, and live extravagantly. I don't want you to work in the garden anymore. We can buy expensive vegetables. That kind of daily labor is too much for you. Actually, I, too, had been finding the daily work in the garden increasingly difficult. I had cried and raged like a madwoman earlier because the exhaustion from the garden work and my sadness had become intertwined, making everything seem hateful and unbearable. I sat on the bed, head bowed, and remained silent. Kazuko. Yes. Where is this place you have to go? I felt my face flush to my neck. Mr. Hosoda. I remained silent. Mother sighed deeply. Can I talk about the past? Yes, I whispered. When you left Mr. Yamaki's house and came back to Nishikatamakai, I didn't mean to blame you for anything. But I did say one thing. I've been betrayed by you. Do you remember? Then you started crying. I felt bad for using such harsh words as betrayed. But at the time, I was so grateful and relieved to hear Mother say that to me that I cried tears of joy when I said I had been betrayed. It wasn't because you left Mr. Yamaki's house. It was when he told me that you were actually in love with Mr. Hosoda. When I heard that, I was truly shocked. Because Mr. Hosoda, he already had a wife and children. No matter how much we admired him, there was nothing we could do. It's terrible that he said we were in love. Mr. Yamaki just assumed that. It wasn't true. Is that so? You're not still thinking about Mr. Hosoda, are you? Where is this place you have to go? It's not Mr. Hosoda's place. Really? Then where? Mother. I was thinking the other day, what makes humans completely different from other animals? Language, intelligence, thought, social order. Other animals have all of those too, to varying degrees. They might even have faith. Humans boast about being the lords of creation, but it seems we're not fundamentally different from other animals. But I found one thing. You probably won't understand. Something that other creatures definitely don't have, something that only humans have. It's secrets. What do you think? Mother blushed slightly and smiled beautifully. I hope your secret bears fruit, Kazuko. Every morning, I pray to Father that you will find happiness. A scene suddenly flashed in my mind, a drive with Father to Nezu, stopping along the way, the autumn scenery. Bush clover, pinks, gentians, petrinias, autumn wildflowers in bloom. The wild grapes were still green. Then another scene, Father and I on a motorboat on Lake Biwa. I jumped into the water, small fish brushing against my legs shadows clearly visible on the lakebed, moving. These scenes, unrelated to anything before or after, flickered in my mind and then vanished. I slid off the bed, embraced Mother's knees, and for the first time, I was able to say, I'm sorry, Mother. I'm so sorry for what I said. Looking back, that day was perhaps the last glimmer of happiness for us. Then Naoji returned from the South Pacific, and our true hell began. Point 3. A feeling of utter helplessness, as if I could no longer bear to live. Is this what anxiety feels like? Waves of anguish washed over me, constricting and releasing my heart like the rapid succession of white clouds racing across the sky after a summer shower. My pulse faltered, my breath grew shallow, my vision blurred, and all the strength drained from my body, from the tips of my fingers. I couldn't continue knitting. It had been raining drearily for days, making everything seem listless and melancholic. Today, I brought my wicker chair to the veranda of the living room and decided to resume knitting a sweater I had started in the spring and then abandoned. The yarn was a pale, faded peony pink, and I had planned to add cobalt blue yarn to it. This pale peony pink yarn. Mother had used it to knit a scarf for me 20 years ago, when I was still in elementary school. The scarf had a hood attached, and when I wore it and looked in the mirror, I looked like a little goblin. Besides, the color was completely different from the scarves worn by my classmates, and I absolutely hated it. A wealthy classmate from Kansai complimented me, saying in a grown-up tone, "That's a nice scarf you have there." But I felt even more embarrassed and never wore the scarf again. I had left it abandoned for years. Then, this spring, I decided to unravel it and use the yarn for my sweater, as a sort of resurrection of dead stock. But I didn't like the faded color and abandoned the project again. Today, feeling utterly restless, I picked it up again and started knitting listlessly. But as I knitted, I realized that the pale peony pink yarn and the gray, rainy sky were blending together, creating an incredibly soft and mild tone. I hadn't realized it before. I hadn't known the importance of coordinating one's outfit with the color of the sky. How beautiful and wonderful harmony could be. I was slightly surprised, even dazed. Strangely, both the grey sky and the pale peony pink yarn seemed to come alive when combined. The yarn in my hands suddenly felt warm and comforting, and the cold, rainy sky seemed as soft as velvet. It reminded me of Monet's painting of a temple in the fog. I felt as if I had finally understood the meaning of good taste thanks to the color of this yarn. Only good children understand such things. Mother had chosen this pale peony pink yarn knowing how beautifully it would harmonize with the winter sky, but I, in my foolishness, had disliked it. Yet, she never forced it on me, a child. She let me have my way and waited silently, pretending not to notice, until I finally understood the beauty of this color, 20 years later. What a wonderful mother she was. The thought made me feel deeply grateful, but at the same time, a wave of fear and anxiety washed over me. Was I, together with Naoji, tormenting and weakening this wonderful mother, driving her to an early death? The more I dwelled on these thoughts, the more ominous my premonitions became, until I felt so overwhelmed with anxiety that I could no longer bear to live. My fingers lost their strength, I laid the knitting needles on my lap, sighed deeply, looked up, closed my eyes, and murmured, "Mother." Mother, who had been reading a book at her desk in the corner of the room, replied, "Yes." With a puzzled expression flustered, I blurted out loudly, "The rose has finally bloomed." "Did you know, Mother? I just noticed it. It's finally bloomed." The rose bush right in front of the veranda, it was a rose that Uncle Wada had brought back from a faraway place, either France or England, I couldn't remember. Uncle Wada had transplanted it into the garden of this villa a few months ago. I had known since that morning that the first blossom had finally opened, but I pretended I had just noticed it, making a fuss to cover my embarrassment. The flower was a deep purple, radiating a quiet pride and strength I knew, Mother replied calmly. Such things seem to matter a great deal to you. Perhaps. Is that pathetic? No, I'm just saying that's part of who you are. You like pasting pictures from magazines onto matchboxes or making handkerchiefs for dolls. And the way you talk about the rose in the garden, it's as if you're talking about a living person. It's because I don't have children, I blurted out. The words were completely unexpected, even to me. I was startled by what I had just said and nervously fidgeted with my knitting. 29. You are. A man's voice, deep and resonant, like a voice heard over a telephone, echoed in my mind. I blushed crimson with embarrassment. Mother didn't say anything and resumed reading her book. She had been wearing a gauze mask lately and had become noticeably quiet. She was wearing the mask at Naoji's insistence. Naoji had returned from the South Pacific about 10 days ago, his face dark and tanned, but he had appeared at the back door one summer evening without any warning. Wow, this is awful. What a tasteless house. You should put up a sign that says Rarai Ken. Shumai available. That was Naoji's greeting when we met again for the first time. A few days before his arrival, Mother had been in bed with a sore tongue. She said the tip of her tongue hurt when she moved it, even though it looked perfectly normal. She couldn't eat anything but thin rice porridge. When I suggested she see a doctor, she shook her head and said with a wry smile, "They'll laugh at me." I painted her tongue with Luggle's solution, but it seemed to have no effect. I was growing increasingly irritable, and then, Naoji returned. He sat by Mother's bedside, bowed, saying I'm home, and immediately stood up, walking around the small house, inspecting it. I followed him. So? Has Mother changed? Changed? Of course she's changed. She's withered away. She might as well die. Someone like Mother can't survive in this world. It's too pathetic to watch. And me. You've become vulgar. You look like you've had a few men. Where's the booze? I'm drinking tonight. I went to the only inn in the village and asked Osaki, the proprietress, if she could spare some alcohol for my brother, who had just returned home. Osaki said she was unfortunately out of alcohol at the moment. When I told Naoji this, he made a strange, unfamiliar face and said, "See? That's because you're bad at negotiating." He asked me where the inn was, slipped on his garden clogs, and rushed out. He didn't come back, no matter how long I waited. I prepared baked apples, which he used to love, and some egg dishes, replaced the dining room light bulb with a brighter one, and waited. After a while, Osaki peeked in through the kitchen door and said in a low voice, as if it were a grave matter, her round, carp-like eyes wide with concern. Excuse me. Is everything all right? His drinking shochu. Shochu? Is it methyl alcohol? No, it's not methyl alcohol, but just let him drink. Osaki swallowed hard and nodded, then disappeared. I went to Mother and said, he's drinking at Osaki's place. Mother twisted her mouth slightly and smiled. I see. I wonder if he's given up on the opium. You should have your dinner. And tonight, the three of us will sleep together in this room. We'll put Naoji's futon in the middle. I felt like crying. Late at night, Naoji returned, his footsteps heavy. The three of us slept together in the living room, under a single mosquito net. Why don't you tell Mother about the South Pacific? I said, lying in bed. There's nothing to tell. Nothing. I've forgotten it all. On the train, when I arrived in Japan, I saw rice paddies from the window. They were incredibly beautiful. That's all. Turn off the light. I can't sleep. I turned off the light. The summer moonlight flooded the mosquito net. The next morning, Naoji lay on his stomach in bed, smoking a cigarette, gazing out at the sea. So, her tongue hurts, he said, as if he had just noticed Mother's ailment. Mother just smiled faintly. It's probably psychosomatic. She sleeps with her mouth open, doesn't she? How slovenly. She should wear a mask. Soak some gauze in Rivanol solution and put it inside the mask. I burst out laughing. What kind of therapy is that? Aesthetic therapy. But I'm sure Mother hates wearing masks. Mother had always hated anything on her face, whether it was a mask, an eye patch, or glasses. Mother, do you want to wear a mask? I asked. I will, she replied seriously, in a low voice. Her reply startled me. She seemed willing to believe and obey anything Naoji said. After breakfast, I prepared a mask as Naoji had instructed, soaking gauze in Rivanol solution. When I brought it to Mother, she silently accepted it and, still lying in bed, obediently looped the strings around her ears. She looked like a little girl, and the sight saddened me. A little after noon, Naoji, saying he had to meet his friends in Tokyo and his literary mentor, changed into his suit, received 2,000 yen from Mother, and left for Tokyo. He hadn't returned for almost 10 days now. And Mother, wearing her mask every day, waited for him. Rivanol is good medicine. When I wear this mask, the pain in my tongue disappears, she said with a smile. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying. She said she was feeling better and was now up and about, but she still didn't have much of an appetite and had become very quiet. I was deeply worried. Naoji was probably carousing around Tokyo with that novelist, Yuhara, caught in the city's vortex of madness. The more I thought about it, the more unbearable it became. I had blurted out the news about the rose and the strange remark about not having children, and now things were getting worse and worse. So I cried, standing up. I didn't know where to go, restless and fidgety. I wandered upstairs to the Western-style room. This room was supposed to be Naoji's. A few days ago, Mother and I had discussed it and asked Mr. Nokai, the farmer, to help us move all of Naoji's belongings from our Nishikatamakai house, his dresser, desk, bookshelves, and 5 or 6 wooden crates filled with books and notebooks, up to this room. We had decided to let Naoji arrange the furniture as he pleased when he returned from Tokyo. Until then, we thought it best to leave everything as it was, scattered haphazardly around the room. The room was so cluttered, it was almost impossible to walk around. I casually picked up one of Naoji's notebooks from a wooden crate. On the cover, he had written, "Evening Glory Diary." Inside, the following words were scribbled. "Burning alive. Even in agony, unable to utter a single cry, an unprecedented, unheard of hell, unlike anything since the beginning of time. Don't try to gloss it over. Ideology. A lie. Doctrine. A lie. Ideal. A lie. Order. A lie. Sincerity. Truth. Purity. All lies. The wisteria of Ushijima, said to be 1,000 years old, the wisteria of Kumanoyo, said to be several hundred years old, their flower clusters, the former reaching 9 feet, the latter over 5 feet. Only such flower clusters stir my heart. That, too, is a child of man. It lives. Logic, in the end, is simply love of logic. Not love of living human beings, money and women. Logic blushes and scurries away. Faust's courageous demonstration, A virgin's smile is more precious than all the knowledge of history, philosophy, education, religion, law, politics, economics, sociology. Learning is another name for vanity. It is an attempt to become something other than human. I can swear to Gertie himself, I can write skillfully. A flawless composition, with a touch of humor, sorrow that sears the reader's eyes, or perhaps a solemn, proper, so-called upright and perfect novel, read aloud. It could be a movie narration. It's so embarrassing, I can't bring myself to write it. Such an awareness of creating a masterpiece is petty. To straighten one's collar while reading a novel is the behavior of a madman. In that case, one might as well wear a hari and her karma. The best works appear effortless. I write a story, deliberately flawed, clumsily written, just to see the genuine smile of a friend, then I stumble, scratch my head, and run away. Oh, the joy on my friend's face at that moment, literary, aloof, playing a toy trumpet, presenting myself as the biggest fool in Japan. You're not so bad. May you live long. What is this affection? My friend, with a smug expression, says, that's his bad habit, such a waste. He doesn't know he's loved. Is there anyone who isn't a delinquent? A feeling of emptiness. I want money, otherwise. A natural death in my sleep. I owe nearly 1,000 yen to the pharmacy. Today, I secretly brought the pawnbroker to my room and told him to take anything of value. I desperately needed money. The pawnbroker barely glanced around the room and said, forget it. These aren't even your belongings. Fine, then take only the things I bought with my own allowance, I said defiantly, gathering my junk. Not a single item qualified as collateral. First, a plaster cast of a single hand. The right hand of Venus. A single hand resembling a dahlia, pure white, resting on a pedestal. But look closely, and you see the shock, the whirlwind of shame, the cruelly exposed nakedness, the crimson blush, the burning heat, the contorted posture of Venus, caught in the act of being seen naked by a man. Her unbearable shame is expressed in this slender, white right hand, devoid of fingerprints, without a single line on the palm. It makes my heart ache with pity. But this is, so to speak, a useless trinket. The pawnbroker valued it at 50 sen then, a large map of the suburbs of Paris, a celluloid top nearly a foot in diameter, a special pen nib that can write characters thinner than thread, all treasures I had unearthed. The pawnbroker laughed and said he would take his leave. Wait, I stopped him. In the end, I had him carry a mountain of books and received 5 yen. The books on my shelves are mostly cheap paperbacks, many bought second-hand, so naturally, their value as collateral is low. 5 yen to settle a debt of 1,000 yen. That's about the extent of my power in this world. This is no laughing matter, decadent. But what else can I do to survive? I'd rather someone tell me to die than criticize me for this. It would be so much cleaner. But people rarely say die. Stingy, cautious hypocrites. Justice? The essence of class struggle isn't about such things. Humanity. Don't make me laugh. I know. It's about defeating your opponent for your own happiness. Killing them. If it's not a death sentence, then what is it? Don't sugarcoat it. But even in our class, there are no decent people. Idiots, ghosts, misers, mad dogs, braggarts, gozaimasurus, pissing from the clouds. They don't even deserve to be told to die. War. Japan's war is an act of desperation. I don't want to die caught up in this desperation. I'd rather die alone. When people lie, they always put on a serious face. The seriousness of our leaders these days. PFFFT, I want to spend time with people who don't seek respect, but such good people wouldn't want to spend time with me. When I pretended to be precocious, people whispered that I was precocious. When I pretended to be lazy, people whispered that I was lazy. When I pretended I couldn't write novels, people whispered that I couldn't write. When I pretended to be a liar, people whispered that I was a liar. When I pretended to be rich, people whispered that I was rich. When I pretended to be indifferent, people whispered that I was indifferent. But when I was truly suffering and couldn't help but moan, people whispered that I was pretending to suffer. Something's amiss. In the end, there's no other choice but suicide. The thought that even after all this suffering, it would all end in suicide, made me cry out loud. On a spring morning, a young student from Heidelberg hanged himself from a plum branch adorned with a few blossoms. Mother, scold me. How? Call me a coward. A coward. Is that enough? Mother has unparalleled kindness. The thought of her makes me want to cry. I will die to atone to mother. Forgive me. Just this once, forgive me year after year. Eating the same food. The crane's chick. Grows plump and healthy. A pitiful sight, this growing fat, New Year's Day draft. Morphine, atramol, narcopone, pantopane, pavanol, panopin, atropine. What is pride? What is pride? Can't people, no, can't men live without thinking, I'm superior, I have something good about me? Hating people, being hated by people. A battle of wits. Solemnity equals a sense of idiocy. Anyway, since I'm alive, I must be faking it. A letter requesting a loan. Please reply, please send me a reply, and may it be good news. I imagine all sorts of humiliations and moan to myself. I'm not putting on an act. Absolutely not. Please. I'm dying of shame. I'm not exaggerating. Day and night, I tremble, waiting for your reply. Don't make me eat dirt. I hear whispers of laughter from the walls, and I toss and turn in bed all night. Don't humiliate me, sister. I closed the Evening Glory diary, put it back in the wooden crate, walked over to the window, opened it wide, and looked down at the garden shrouded in white rain, thinking about those days. 6 years have passed since then. Naoji's drug addiction caused my divorce. No, I shouldn't say that. Even without Naoji's addiction, my divorce would have happened eventually, triggered by something else. It was as if it had been predetermined from the moment I was born. Naoji often asked me for money to pay off his debts at the pharmacy. I had just married into the Yamaki family and didn't have much disposable income. Besides, it seemed inappropriate to secretly give my husband's money to my younger brother. So, I consulted with Seiki, my nanny who had accompanied me from my parents' house, and we sold my bracelets, necklaces, and dresses. Naoji wrote to me asking for money, saying he was so ashamed and distressed that he couldn't bear to face me or even speak to me on the phone. He instructed me to have Seiki deliver the money to Mr. Jiro Yuhara, a novelist living in the Keiano apartments in Kyobashi. He said that although Mr. Yuhara had a bad reputation, he was not a bad person, so I could trust him with the money. He said Mr. Yuhara would immediately inform him by phone upon receiving the money. He begged me to do as he asked and swore that he didn't want mother to find out about his relapse. He said he intended to overcome his addiction without her knowledge. He promised that once he paid off his debt at the pharmacy with the money I gave him, he would go to a villa in Shiobara, regain his health, and return home. He swore to God that once the debt was paid, he would stop using drugs completely. He begged me to believe him and to keep it a secret from mother, to use Seiki to deliver the money to Mr. Yuhara at the Keiano apartments. I followed his instructions and had Seiki secretly deliver the money to Yuhara's apartment. What kind of person is Mr. Yuhara? I asked. He's a small, pale, and rather unattractive man, Seiki replied. But he's rarely at home. Usually, it's just his wife and their little daughter, about 6 or 7 years old. His wife isn't particularly beautiful, but she seems to be a kind and capable woman. I feel comfortable in trusting her with the money. Back then, I was much more naive and carefree than I am now. No, there's no comparison. I was a completely different person. But even I, in my naivete, became increasingly worried as Naoji's requests for money continued, each time for a larger sum. One day, on my way home from a no performance, I dismissed the car in Ginza and walked alone to the Keiano apartments in Kyobashi. Yuhara was alone in his apartment, reading a newspaper. He was wearing a striped kimono and a dark blue kajiri hari. He gave me a strange first impression, like a mythical creature, both old and young at the same time. My wife is out with our daughter, getting rations, he said in a slightly nasal, halting voice. He seemed to have mistaken me for a friend of his wife's. When I told him I was Naoji's sister, he snorted. For some reason, it sent a chill down my spine. Shall we go out? He said, putting on a double-breasted overcoat, taking a new pair of Jita from the shoe rack, and walking briskly down the apartment corridor outside. It was early winter dusk. The air was cold, like a river wind blowing from the Sumida River. Yuhara walked silently towards Tsukiji, his right shoulder slightly raised against the wind. I hurried after him, almost running. We entered the basement of a building behind the Tokyo Theatre. 4 or 5 groups of customers were quietly drinking at tables in a narrow room about 20 tatami mats in size. Yuhara drank from a glass. He brought another glass for me and offered me a drink. I had 2 glasses, but I felt nothing. Yuhara drank, smoked, and remained silent. I, too, remained silent. It was the first time I had been to such a place, but I felt strangely calm and at ease. You should drink, too, he said. What? No, I mean your brother. It would be good for him to switch to alcohol. I was addicted to drugs myself once. People get squeamish about drugs. Alcohol, it's the same thing, really, but people are more forgiving of alcohol. Let's turn your brother into a drunkard. What do you say? I've seen a drunkard once. On New Year's Day, as I was about to leave the house, one of our chauffeur's acquaintances was asleep in the passenger seat of the car, snoring loudly, his face crimson like a demon. I was startled and cried out, and the chauffeur said, "He's a drunkard. It can't be helped," and carried him out of the car, slung over his shoulder, and took him somewhere. The man was limp, like he had no bones, and yet, he was mumbling something. That was the first time I saw a drunkard. It was quite amusing. I'm a drunkard myself. But, you're different, aren't you? You're a drunkard too. I am not. I've seen a drunkard. It's completely different. Yuhara laughed for the first time, seemingly amused. Well, perhaps your brother can't become a drunkard, but it would be good for him to become a drinker. Let's go. It's getting late. You must be in a hurry to get back. No, I don't mind. Well, I find this place rather confining. Hey, miss. Check, please. Will it be very expensive? I have some money with me. Is that so? How much do you have? I looked inside my bag and told him how much money I had. With that much, we could drink at 2 or 3 more places. You're mocking me, Yuhara said, frowning, then he laughed. Would you like to go somewhere else for a drink? I asked. He shook his head. No, I've had enough. I'll hail a taxi for you. You should go home. We climbed the dark staircase from the basement. Yuhara, who was walking ahead of me, suddenly turned around midway up the stairs and quickly kissed me. I received the kiss with my lips tightly closed. I didn't particularly like Yuhara, yet from that moment on, I had that secret. Yuhara quickly ran up the stairs. I felt strangely light and clear-headed as I slowly followed him. Outside, the river wind felt pleasant on my face. Yuhara hailed a taxi for me, and we parted without a word. As the car drove away, I felt as if the world had suddenly expanded like the sea. I have a lover, I said one day to my husband, feeling lonely after being scolded by him. I know. Mr. Hosoda, isn't it? Can't you bring yourself to break it off? I remained silent. That question came up between us every time something went wrong. I realized it was over. Like a piece of fabric cut incorrectly, it couldn't be mended. I had to discard it and start over with a new piece. One night, my husband said, "Surely, the child you're carrying isn't." His words filled me with such terror that I trembled uncontrollably. Looking back, both my husband and I were young. I didn't know what love was. I didn't even understand affection. I was infatuated with the paintings of Mr. Hosoda and declared to everyone that if I couldn't be his wife, there was no point in getting married at all. Because of this, everyone misunderstood, and I, still ignorant of love and affection, continued to openly declare my fondness for Mr. Hosoda without realizing the implications. Things became complicated. The baby sleeping in my womb became the target of my husband's suspicion. No one explicitly mentioned divorce, but the atmosphere around us became strained, and I eventually returned to mother's house with Seiki, my nanny. Then, my baby was stillborn, and I became ill and bedridden. That was the end of my marriage to Mr. Yamaki. Naoji seemed to feel somewhat responsible for my divorce. "I'm going to die," he said, crying hysterically, his face contorted with grief. I asked him how much he owed the pharmacy, and the amount was staggering. Later, I found out he hadn't told me the truth. The actual amount was almost 3 times what he had told me. I met Mr. Yuhara. He seems like a good man. Why don't you go drinking with him? Alcohol isn't that expensive. I can always give you money for drinks. Don't worry about the pharmacy bill. We'll figure something out. Naoji seemed pleased that I had met Yuhara and spoke well of him. He took the money I gave him and immediately went to see Yuhara. Addiction is perhaps a mental illness. Whenever I praised Yuhara, borrowed his books from Naoji, and said things like, "He's such a remarkable man," Naoji would say, "You wouldn't understand," but he seemed pleased nonetheless. He would then give me another one of Yuhara's books to read. I gradually became a genuine reader of Yuhara's novels, and Naoji and I would discuss him and his work. Naoji went to see Yuhara almost every night, and as Yuhara had planned, Naoji gradually shifted his addiction to alcohol. I secretly consulted Mother about Naoji's pharmacy debt, and she covered her face with her hand and remained silent for a while. Then she looked up, smiled sadly, and said, "There's nothing we can do, I suppose. It might take years, but we'll pay it back little by little." 6 years have passed since then. Evening Glory. Oh, Naoji must be suffering, too. And he still doesn't know what to do, which path to take. He's probably just drinking himself to death every day. I wonder if he should just embrace being a delinquent. Perhaps that would make things easier for him. He wrote in his notebook, "Is there anyone who isn't a delinquent? Come to think of it, I'm a delinquent, too. Uncle Wada is a delinquent. Even Mother seems like a delinquent. Perhaps being a delinquent simply means being kind. Point 4. I've been agonizing over whether or not to write this letter. But this morning, I happened to recall Jesus' words, "Be ye therefore wise as serpents, and harmless as doves," and it gave me a strange sense of courage. So, I decided to write to you. I am Naoji's older sister. Do you remember me? If you don't, please try to recall. Naoji seems to have imposed on you again the other day. I apologize for the trouble he caused. But honestly, I feel it's rather absurd for me to apologize for Naoji's behavior. It's his own responsibility. Today, I'm not writing to you about Naoji, but about myself. I have a request. Naoji told me that you lost your apartment in the air raids and moved to your current address. I had considered visiting you in the suburbs of Tokyo, but Mother hasn't been well lately, and I can't leave her alone to go to Tokyo. So, I decided to write to you instead. There's something I'd like to discuss with you from the perspective of traditional female virtues, as outlined in the Greater Learning for Women. My request might seem incredibly selfish, even reprehensible, a heinous crime, perhaps. But we can no longer continue living as we are. My current life is unbearable. It's not a matter of liking or disliking it. If things continue this way, the three of us, Mother, Naoji, and I, will not be able to survive. Yesterday, I was feeling so restless and feverish, so suffocated and at a loss for what to do, when a young woman from the farm down the hill came to deliver rice in the pouring rain. I gave her some clothes, as we had agreed. As we sat facing each other in the dining room, drinking tea, she asked in a very matter-of-fact tone, "How long do you think you can survive by selling your belongings?" 6 months, maybe a year, I replied. I covered half my face with my hand and said, "I'm sleepy. So sleepy. You're exhausted. It's probably neurasthenia." I suppose so. I felt tears welling up. The words realism and romanticism suddenly popped into my head. I have no realism. How can I possibly survive like this? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Mother is practically an invalid, spending her days in bed, drifting in and out of sleep. Naoji, as you know, is mentally ill. When he's here, he's either drinking shochu at Osaki's inn and restaurant, or he's taking trips to Tokyo every 3 days with the money we get from selling our clothes. But that's not what's truly distressing me. It's the terrifying premonition that my own life, in this daily routine, is rotting away like a banana leaf left to decay, that I'm standing still, slowly decomposing. It's unbearable. That's why, even if it means defying the Greater Learning for Women, I want to escape this life. So, I'm writing to you to ask for your advice. I want to tell Mother and Naoji the truth. I want to tell them that I'm in love with someone and that I intend to live as his mistress. You should know who this man is. His initials are MC. Whenever I'm faced with hardship, I long to run to MC, and the yearning is almost unbearable. Like you, MC has a wife and children. He also seems to have other female friends, younger and more beautiful than me. But I feel that going to MC is my only path to survival. I've never met his wife, but I hear she's a kind and gentle woman. When I think about her, I feel like a terrible person. But my current life is even more terrifying, and I can't help but rely on MC wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. I want to pursue my love. But I'm sure no one will approve, not Mother, not Naoji, not anyone else. What do you think? I feel I have no choice but to decide and act on my own, and the thought brings tears to my eyes. This is the first time I've ever done something like this. Is there no way to pursue this difficult path with the blessings of those around me? I rack my brain, like trying to solve a complicated algebra problem, searching for a single thread that will unravel the tangled mess, and sometimes, I feel a glimmer of hope and become strangely cheerful. But what does MC think of me? The thought fills me with despair. After all, I'm practically forcing myself on him. What should I call it? Not a pushy wife, but a pushy mistress, perhaps. If he rejects me, that's the end of it. So, I'm asking you a favor. Please ask him for me. 6 years ago, a faint rainbow appeared in my heart. It wasn't love, not in the conventional sense, but as the years passed, the colors of the rainbow grew more vivid, and I've never lost sight of it. Rainbows in the sky after a shower eventually fade away, but the rainbow in my heart seems eternal. Please ask him. What did he truly think of me? Did he see me as a fleeting rainbow after the rain, something that has already vanished? If so, I must erase my own rainbow. But I don't think I can erase the rainbow in my heart without first extinguishing my life. I pray for your reply. Amar. Jiro Uehara, my Chekhov. My MC. Lately, I've been gaining weight. I don't think I'm becoming more animalistic, but rather, more human. This summer, I read one novel by D.H. Lawrence. I'm writing to you again because I haven't received a reply. You probably saw through the cunning and manipulative nature of my previous letter. I poured all my guile into every line of that letter. You must think I'm simply asking you to save me from my predicament, that I just want your money. And I won't deny it, but if I merely wanted a patron, I wouldn't have chosen you, of all people. I'm sure there are plenty of wealthy old men who would be happy to take me under their wing. In fact, I recently had a rather strange proposal. You might know him. An elderly gentleman, over 60, unmarried, a member of the Art Academy, a renowned master, came to this villa to ask for my hand in marriage. He lived near our house in Nishikatamakai, and we would occasionally see him due to neighborhood association activities. One autumn evening, as Mother and I were driving past his house, we saw him standing alone by his gate, looking lost in thought. Mother waved to him from the car window, and his usually stern, dark face flushed crimson, redder than autumn leaves. He's in love, I said playfully. He's in love with you, Mother. But Mother calmly replied, as if talking to herself, no, he's a great man. It's a family tradition to respect artists. It seems this master had lost his wife some years ago. Through Uncle Wada and a prince who was a fellow Tengu enthusiast in No, he made a formal proposal to Mother. Mother suggested that I reply to him directly. Without a second thought, I wrote to him, declining his proposal, explaining that I had no intention of getting married. Is it all right to refuse? I asked, of course. I didn't think it was a serious proposal anyway. At the time, the master was staying at his villa in Karuiza, so I sent my reply there. 2 days later, before my letter reached him, he suddenly appeared at our villa, saying he was on his way to Aizu Onsen for work and decided to stop by. It seems artists, no matter how old they are, can be surprisingly childish and impulsive. Mother wasn't feeling well, so I received him in the Chinese style room, serving him tea. My letter declining your proposal should be arriving in Karuiza about now. I've given it a lot of thought. I began. Is that so? He said hurriedly, wiping his brow. Well, please reconsider. I might not be able to offer you spiritual happiness, so to speak, but I can certainly make you happy materially. That much I can guarantee. To be frank, I don't quite understand what you mean by happiness. Forgive my impudence, but in Chekhov's letters to his wife, he wrote, "Give me a child, our child." And in an essay by Nietzsche, I believe, there was a phrase, "A woman who wants to bear children." I want children. Happiness, that doesn't matter to me. I want money, too, but only enough to raise my children. The master chuckled strangely and said, "You're a rare woman. You say exactly what's on your mind. Being with someone like you might inspire new ideas for my work." His words seemed a bit affected for a man of his age. I thought that if I could truly rejuvenate the work of such a great artist, it would be a worthwhile endeavor. But I couldn't imagine myself in his embrace. Does it matter if I don't feel any love for you? I asked with a slight smile. It doesn't matter for a woman. It's good for a woman to be a little vague, he replied seriously, but a woman like me can't even consider marriage without love. I'm a grown woman. I'll be 30 next year. I suddenly felt like covering my mouth. 30. A woman retains a maidenly fragrance until she's 29. But a woman of 30 no longer has that fragrance anywhere on her body. I remembered reading that in a French novel, and a sense of unbearable loneliness washed over me. I looked out the window, and the sea, bathed in the midday sun, glittered harshly, like shards of glass. When I read that novel, I readily agreed. I had believed that a woman's life was over at 30. I missed those days. As my bracelets, necklaces, dresses, and obies disappeared from my life, one by one, so too did my maidenly fragrance. A poor, middle-aged woman. Oh, how repulsive. But even middle-aged women in general, they have their own lives, too. I've begun to understand that lately. When a British teacher returned to England, she said to me, then 19 years old, you mustn't fall in love. You'll only be unhappy. If you must fall in love, wait until you're older. Wait until you're 30. But even after hearing those words, I was completely clueless. I couldn't imagine what life would be like after 30. I heard a rumor that you're selling this villa, the master said suddenly, his expression mischievous. I laughed. Forgive me. It reminded me of the cherry orchard. Are you planning to buy it? The master, a sensitive artist, seemed to have taken offense. He twisted his mouth in displeasure and fell silent. It's true that there was talk of selling the villa to a certain prince for 500,000 yen, but the deal fell through. The master must have heard the rumor. He seemed to be in a foul mood, perhaps because he felt we were comparing him to Lopakin in the cherry orchard. After a bit of small talk, he left. What I seek from you is not Lopakin. That much I can say with certainty. I'm simply asking you to accept a middle-aged woman's advances. I first met you about 6 years ago. At the time, I knew nothing about you. I just thought of you as Naoji's mentor, a somewhat dubious mentor, at that. We drank from glasses together, and then, you were a bit playful, weren't you? But I wasn't bothered. I felt strangely light-hearted. I didn't like or dislike you. I was indifferent. Then, to please Naoji, I borrowed your books and read them. Some I enjoyed, some I didn't. I wasn't a particularly devoted reader. But over the past 6 years, you've somehow seeped into my consciousness like a fog. The memory of that night, on the basement staircase, what we did, it has suddenly become vivid and meaningful, as if it were a pivotal moment in my life. I feel such tenderness towards you. Could this be love? The thought filled me with a sense of helpless loneliness, and I cried softly. You are completely different from other men. I'm not like Nina in The Seagull, in love with a writer. I don't idolize novelists. Don't mistake me for a literary girl. I want your baby. If we had met much earlier, when you were still single and I hadn't yet married Mr. Yamaki, and if we had married, I might not be suffering like this now. But I've resigned myself to the fact that marriage with you is impossible. To push your wife aside would be a violent act, and I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't even mind being your mistress, I hate that word, but even if I call myself your lover, it's still just a mistress, so I might as well be blunt. But being a mistress, it's apparently quite complicated. I hear that mistresses are usually discarded when they're no longer needed. And when men approach 60, they usually return to their wives. So, I've heard people say that being a mistress is a bad idea. I overheard our old servant and nanny discussing this in Nishikatamakai. But that's just ordinary mistresses. I think our case is different. The most important thing to you is your work. And if you care for me, then our being together would be beneficial to your work. Then, your wife would surely understand. It might sound like a strange, contrived rationale, but I don't think I'm wrong. The only thing that matters is your reply. Do you like me? Do you dislike me? Or are you indifferent? I dread hearing your answer, but I must know. In my previous letter, I called myself a pushy mistress. In this letter, I've said I'm a middle-aged woman forcing myself on you. But now that I think about it, without your reply, I can't even push myself on you. I'll just wither away, alone and forgotten. I need to hear from you. It just occurred to me, You write about romantic adventures in your novels, and you have a reputation as a terrible scoundrel, but perhaps you're actually quite conventional. I don't understand conventions. I think a good life is one where you can do what you love. I want to have your baby. I don't want anyone else's baby, no matter what. That's why I'm writing to you, asking for your advice. If you understand, please reply. Please tell me how you feel. The rain has stopped, and the wind has picked up. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm about to go down to the village to receive my ration of first-grade sake, 6 go. I'll put 2 empty rum bottles in a bag and this letter in my breast pocket. In about 10 minutes, I'll be on my way. This sake is not for Naoji. It's for me. I'll have a glass every night. Sake should be drunk from a glass, shouldn't it? Why don't you come visit? M.C. It's raining again today. A fine, misty rain. I've been waiting for your reply every single day, without stepping outside, but nothing has come. What are you thinking? Perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned the master's proposal in my previous letter. Did you think I was trying to provoke your jealousy by mentioning such a thing? But that proposal is over. I was just talking about it with Mother, and we laughed about it. Mother's tongue had been sore, and Naoji recommended the aesthetic therapy. It seems to have worked, and she's feeling a bit better these days. Earlier, as I was standing on the veranda, gazing at the swirling drizzle, thinking about how you must be feeling, Mother called from the dining room, "The milk is ready. Come and have some." I made it extra hot because it's cold today. We sat in the dining room, drinking hot milk, and talked about the master's proposal. He and I, we don't suit each other at all, do we? You don't, Mother said frankly. I'm so selfish. And I don't dislike artists. Plus, he seems to have a substantial income. I know it would be a good match. But, it's no use. Mother smiled. You're a bad girl, Kazuko. You say it's no use, but you seem to be enjoying your conversation with him the other day. I don't understand you. But, it was interesting. I wanted to talk to him more. I lack social graces. No, you're just being coy. Coy, Kazuko. Mother is in very good spirits today. She looked at my hair, which I had put up in a bun for the first time yesterday, and said, "Buns suit women with thin hair. Yours is too thick. It looks as if it should be adorned with a small gold crown. It doesn't suit you. I'm disappointed. But you once told me that I have a beautiful, white neck and that I should wear my hair in a way that shows it off. You remember such things, don't you? I never forget a compliment. It's more enjoyable to remember them. He must have complimented you on something, too." He did. "That's why I became so smitten." He said, "Being with you inspires me." Oh, it was so thrilling. I don't dislike artists, but I can't stand those pretentious, self-important types. What's Naoji's mentor like? Her question made me uneasy. I don't really know, but since he's Naoji's mentor, he's probably a certified delinquent. Certified? Mother murmured, her eyes gleaming with amusement. That's an interesting expression. If he's certified, he must be safe. Like a kitten with a bell around its neck. It's the uncertified delinquents who are dangerous. I was so overjoyed that I felt as if my body were turning into smoke and being drawn up into the sky. Do you understand? Do you understand why I was so happy? If you don't, I'll hit you. Why don't you come visit? It would be unnatural and awkward for me to tell Naoji to bring you here, so you could pretend to drop by on a whim, and Naoji could show you around. But if possible, please come alone, while Naoji is away on one of his trips to Tokyo. If Naoji is here, he'll monopolize your attention, and the two of you will probably end up drinking shochu at Osaki's place. It's a family tradition to welcome artists. Long ago, the painter Korin stayed at our family home in Kyoto for a long time and painted beautiful pictures on the sliding doors. So, I'm sure Mother would be delighted to have you visit. You'll probably sleep in the Western-style room upstairs. Please remember to turn off the lights. I'll come upstairs with a small candle. No. Too soon. I like delinquents. Certified delinquents. And I want to become a certified delinquent myself. I feel it's my only way of life. You're the most certified delinquent in all of Japan, aren't you? And lately, I hear many people despise and attack you, calling you vulgar and repulsive. That makes me like you even more. You're a popular man, I'm sure, but I have a feeling you'll eventually fall for me. I can't help but feel that way. And then, we'll live together, and you'll be able to work happily every day. Ever since I was a child, people have often told me, being with you makes me forget my troubles. I've never been disliked by anyone. Everyone has always told me I'm a good girl. So, I don't think you could possibly dislike me. All we need is to meet. I don't need a reply anymore. I just want to see you. And once we meet, everything will become clear. Look at the faint lines that have appeared at the corners of my mouth. Look at the lines of a century of sorrow. My face will tell you more about my feelings than any words could. In my first letter, I wrote about the rainbow in my heart. But that rainbow isn't some elegant, beautiful thing like the glow of fireflies or starlight. If it were such a faint, distant longing, I wouldn't be suffering like this. I would have been able to forget you. The rainbow in my heart is a bridge of flames. It burns with an unbearable intensity. Even a drug addict craving a fix couldn't possibly feel this tormented. While I believe I'm not mistaken, not wicked, I sometimes wonder if I'm about to commit an act of utter folly, and the thought terrifies me. Am I going mad? I often reflect on this. But I'm also being rational and calculating. Please, please come visit. You can come anytime. I'll be waiting. Please trust me. Let's meet again. And if you don't like me then, please tell me so frankly. You ignited the flames in my heart, so you should be the one to extinguish them. I can't do it alone. If only we could meet. If we meet, I'll be saved. If this were the time of the Manyashu or the tale of Genji, my request wouldn't be so unusual. My desire is to become your mistress, the mother of your child. If anyone were to mock such a letter, they would be mocking a woman's struggle to survive. Mocking a woman's life. I can no longer bear the stifling, stagnant air of the harbor. I want to raise my sails, even if there's a storm raging outside. Sails that rest are always dirty. Those who mock me are like sails at rest. They can do nothing. A troubled woman. But I am the one suffering the most from this predicament. It's absurd for an indifferent bystander, their sails hanging limp and useless, to criticize me. Don't try to label me with some ideology. I have no ideology. I've never acted based on ideology or philosophy. I know that those who are praised and respected by society are all liars and hypocrites. I don't trust society. Only certified delinquents are on my side. Certified delinquents. I'm willing to die on that cross. Even if everyone condemns me, I can retort, aren't you all uncertified, and therefore even more dangerous, delinquents? Do you understand? There's no reason for this love. I've said too many logical things. I'm just mimicking Naoji. I'm simply waiting for you. I just want to see you again. That's all. Waiting. Human life is filled with various emotions, joy, anger, sorrow, hatred, but those emotions only account for 1% of our lives. The remaining 99% is spent waiting. Waiting with bated breath for the sound of happiness in the hallway, only to be met with emptiness. Oh, how wretched human life is. This reality, where everyone wishes they hadn't been born. And yet, we continue to wait for something, day in and day out. It's too pathetic. I want to feel joy, to rejoice in life, in being human, in this world. Can't we cast aside restrictive morality? M.C., not my Chekhov. I'm not in love with a writer. MC stands for my child. 5. This summer, I wrote 3 letters to a certain man, but I received no reply. I felt I had no other way to live, so I poured my heart into those 3 letters and sent them off with the desperation of someone leaping from a cliff into raging waves. But no matter how long I waited, there was no reply. I casually asked Naoji about the man, but he seemed unchanged, drinking every night, writing increasingly immoral works, and drawing the ire of society. Naoji was enthusiastic about starting a publishing company, with the man and a few other novelists as advisors. He said he even had someone willing to invest. Judging from Naoji's account, my presence hadn't made the slightest impression on the man's world. I wasn't so much embarrassed as I was struck by the realization that the world as I perceived it was completely different, a strange creature with a life of its own. I felt as if I had been left behind, alone in a desolate autumn field at dusk, my calls and cries unanswered. A feeling of profound desolation I had never experienced before. Was this what heartbreak felt like? Standing alone in this desolate field, I felt as if I had no choice but to wait for the sun to set, to be chilled by the night dew, and eventually die. The thought brought a tearless sob to my throat, my shoulders and chest heaving, my breath caught in my throat. I decided that I had to go to Tokyo and see Yuhara myself. My sails had already been raised, and I was out of the harbor. I couldn't just stand still. I had to see this through to the end. I secretly began preparing for my trip to Tokyo. And then, Mother's condition took a turn for the worse. One night, she had a terrible coughing fit, and her temperature spiked to 39 degrees. It's just because it was cold today. I'll be fine tomorrow, she whispered between coughs. But I didn't think it was an ordinary cold. I decided to call the village doctor the next day. The following morning, her temperature had dropped to 37 degrees, and the coughing had subsided. But I still went to the doctor's office and explained that Mother had been weak lately, that she had developed a fever and a cough that didn't seem like an ordinary cold, and asked him to examine her. I'll come by later, the doctor said. Here, this is a gift. He took 3 pairs from a cupboard in the corner of the waiting room and gave them to me. A little after noon, he arrived at our villa, wearing a white kajiri kimono and a summer hari. As usual, he meticulously examined Mother, listening to her chest and tapping on her back for a long time. Then he turned to me and said, "There's no need to worry. She'll recover if she takes her medicine." I found it strangely amusing and suppressed a laugh. "What about an injection?" I asked. "There's no need for that. It's just a cold. If she rests, it should clear up soon," he replied seriously. But Mother's fever persisted for a week. The coughing had stopped, but her temperature fluctuated between 37.7 in the morning and 39 in the evening. The doctor hadn't been to our house since the day after his initial visit, claiming he had an upset stomach. I went to his office to pick up Mother's medicine and told his nurse that Mother's condition wasn't improving. But the doctor's message remained the same: it's just a common cold. There's no need to worry. He sent me home with liquid and powdered medicine. Naoji was still away in Tokyo, and he hadn't returned for over 10 days. Feeling increasingly anxious and alone, I wrote a postcard to Uncle Wada, informing him of Mother's deteriorating condition. On the 10th day of her fever, the village doctor finally came to see Mother, saying he had recovered from his stomach ailment. He tapped on Mother's chest, his expression serious, and exclaimed, I see. Then he turned to me and said, "I've found the cause of the fever. There's some infiltration in her left lung. But there's no need to worry. The fever will likely persist for a while, but if she rests, she'll be fine." Is that so? I wondered, but clinging to the doctor's diagnosis like a drowning person clinging to a straw, I felt a sense of relief. After the doctor left, I said to Mother, "That's good news, Mother. A little infiltration is quite common. As long as you stay positive, you'll recover in no time. It's just the unusual weather this summer. I hate summer. I hate summer flowers." Mother smiled faintly, her eyes closed. "They say people who like summer flowers die in summer, so I thought I might die this summer. But Naoji came home, so I've lived until autumn." The thought that even Naoji, despite everything, was a source of strength for Mother, saddened me. "But summer is over now, so you're past the critical stage. Mother, the bush clover in the garden is in bloom. And the petrinias, the thoroughworts, the bellflowers, the plume grass, the Japanese pampas grass. The garden is filled with autumn colors. I'm sure your fever will go down by October." I prayed for it. I wished for the end of September, this humid, lingering summer. Once the chrysanthemums bloomed and the warm, pleasant autumn days arrived, I was sure Mother's fever would subside, and she would recover. Then I could meet him, and my plans might finally blossom like a magnificent chrysanthemum. Oh, how I longed for October and the end of Mother's fever. A week after I sent the postcard, thanks to Uncle Wada's arrangements, Dr. Miyoke, an elderly physician who had once served as a court physician, came from Tokyo to examine Mother, accompanied by a nurse. Dr. Miyoke had been a friend of our deceased father, and Mother seemed delighted to see him. The doctor, as always, was ill-mannered and spoke casually, which seemed to amuse Mother. They were engrossed in a lively conversation, seemingly forgetting about the medical examination. When I brought the pudding I had made in the kitchen to the living room, the examination seemed to be over. Dr. Miyoke was sitting in a wicker chair on the veranda, his stethoscope dangling carelessly around his neck like a necklace, saying, "I even eat standing up at udon stalls these days. Can't tell the difference between good and bad anymore." Mother, her expression nonchalant, gazed at the ceiling, listening to his stories. It was nothing serious after all, I thought with relief. "What did you think, doctor?" The village doctor mentioned infiltration in her left lung. I asked Dr. Miyoke, feeling suddenly cheerful. "Oh, it's nothing to worry about," he said casually. "See, mother? You're going to be fine," I said, smiling brightly. "The doctor says it's nothing serious." Just then, Dr. Miyoke stood up and walked towards the Chinese-style room. He seemed to have something to tell me, so I quietly followed him. He stopped in the shadow of a hanging scroll and said, "I hear crepitation." "Not infiltration?" "No. Bronchitis?" I asked, tears welling up in my eyes. "No. Tuberculosis." I didn't want to believe it. If it were pneumonia, infiltration, or bronchitis, I could somehow help her recover. But tuberculosis, oh, it might be hopeless. I felt as if the ground beneath my feet were crumbling. "Is it very bad?" "You hear crepitation?" I asked anxiously, my voice trembling both lungs. "But mother is still strong. She enjoys her meals, she always says they're delicious. It can't be helped." "You're lying. It's not that bad, is it? She'll recover if she eats plenty of butter, eggs, and milk, won't she? Once she builds up her resistance, the fever will go down, right?" "Yes, she needs to eat plenty of everything. See? I told you. She eats about 5 tomatoes every day." "Yes, tomatoes are good. So, she'll be all right, right? She'll recover? This illness, it could be fatal. You should be prepared." For the first time in my life, I was confronted with the despairing reality that there are things in this world beyond human control. 2 years? 3 years? I asked in a trembling voice. "I don't know. There's nothing more I can do." Dr. Miyoke said he had a reservation at an inn in Nagaka Onsen and left with his nurse. I saw them to the gate, then rushed back to mother's bedside and sat down, forcing a smile as if nothing were wrong. "What did the doctor say?" Mother asked. "He said as long as the fever goes down, you'll be fine." "And my lungs?" "He said it's nothing serious. Just like your previous illness, I'm sure. Once the weather cools down, you'll be as good as new." I tried to believe my own lie. I tried to forget the terrifying word fatal. The thought of mother dying felt as if my own body were disappearing, too. I couldn't accept it as reality. I would forget everything and just focus on making delicious meals for mother. Fish, soup, canned food, liver, gravy, tomatoes, eggs, milk, clear soup. I wish we had tofu. Tofu miso soup, white rice, mochi. I would sell everything I owned and make delicious meals for mother. I stood up and went to the Chinese-style room. I moved the chaise longue to the edge of the living room, so I could see mother's face, and sat down. Mother's face, as she lay resting, didn't look like that of an invalid at all. Her eyes were clear and bright, and her complexion was lively. Every morning, she woke up at the same time, went to the bathroom, combed her hair in the 3-mat room by the bathroom, dressed herself neatly, returned to her bed, ate her breakfast sitting up in bed, and then spent the morning reading newspapers and books. The fever only came in the afternoon. Mother is strong. She'll be all right, I repeated to myself, firmly rejecting Dr. Miyoke's diagnosis. I started dozing off, thinking about October, about the chrysanthemums blooming. I found myself in a familiar place in my dream, a lakeside in a forest I had never seen in real life. I was walking silently with a young man in a kimono. The entire landscape was shrouded in a green mist. A white, delicate bridge was submerged at the bottom of the lake. "Oh, the bridge is submerged. We can't go anywhere today. Let's stay at the hotel here." I think there was a vacant room. There was a stone hotel by the lake. The stones were damp with the green mist. Above the stone gate, the words Hotel Switzerland were engraved in fine gold letters. As I was reading SWI, I suddenly remembered mother. What about mother? Would she come to this hotel, too? I wondered. I walked through the stone gate with the young man and entered the front garden. Large, red, hydrangea-like flowers bloomed like flames in the misty garden. When I was a child, I saw a pattern of bright red hydrangeas on a futon and felt strangely sad, but I thought, so, red hydrangeas do exist. Aren't you cold? The young man asked a little. The mist has made my ears wet, and the backs of my ears are cold, I replied, laughing. I wonder what mother is doing. The young man smiled sadly, his eyes filled with tenderness. She's under the ground, he said. Oh, I murmured. That's right. Mother was gone. Her funeral, it was already over, wasn't it? The realization that mother was dead sent a shiver through me. An unbearable loneliness washed over me, and I woke up. The veranda was already bathed in twilight. It was raining. The green melancholy of the dream lingered. Mother, I called. A quiet voice replied, what are you doing? Overjoyed, I jumped up and went to the living room. I just woke up from a nap. I see. I was wondering what you were doing. A long nap, she said, smiling faintly. I was so happy and grateful that she was alive and breathing, that I felt tears welling up. What would you like for dinner? Any requests? I asked, trying to sound cheerful. It doesn't matter. I don't want anything. My temperature reached 39.5 today. Her words deflated me. Feeling lost and helpless, I looked around the dimly lit room and suddenly wanted to die. 39.5. How? It's nothing. It's just. I hate the moments before the fever comes. My head starts to ache, I get chills, and then the fever comes. It was already dark outside. The rain seemed to have stopped, but the wind had picked up. As I was about to turn on the light and go to the dining room, Mother said, don't turn on the light. It hurts my eyes. Isn't it depressing to lie in the dark? I asked, standing there. It's the same if my eyes are closed. I don't feel lonely at all. The bright light bothers me. From now on, please don't turn on the light in the living room, she said. Her words filled me with a sense of foreboding. I silently turned off the light in the living room, went to the next room, turned on the table lamp, and felt an unbearable sense of desolation. I hurried to the dining room, ate some canned salmon with cold rice, and tears streamed down my face. The wind grew stronger as the night wore on, and by 9 o'clock, it started raining again, turning into a full-blown storm. The bamboo blinds I had rolled up a few days ago rattled loudly. I sat in the room next to the living room, reading Rosa Luxemburg's Introduction to Political Economy with strange excitement. I had taken the book from Naoji's room upstairs a few days ago, along with Lenin's selected works and Kautsky's The Social Revolution. I had placed them on my desk, and Mother, on her way back from washing her face in the morning, noticed the 3 books. She picked them up one by one, examined them, sighed softly, placed them back on the desk, and glanced at me with a sad expression. But despite the sadness in her eyes, there was no sign of rejection or disapproval. Mother usually read Hugo, Dumas, Perrot Fils, Musset, Dordet, but I knew that even those sweet stories contained a revolutionary spirit. Perhaps someone like Mother, with her innate refinement, although that expression seems odd, could embrace revolution naturally and effortlessly. I, too, felt slightly pretentious reading Rosa Luxemburg, but I was also deeply fascinated. This book was supposedly about economics, but reading it as an economics text was incredibly dull. It seemed to state the obvious. Or perhaps I simply didn't understand economics at all. In any case, I found it utterly uninteresting. It was a discipline that assumed humans were inherently selfish and would always remain so. For someone who didn't believe in human selfishness, questions of distribution and the like were completely irrelevant. Yet, I read this book and felt a strange excitement. It was the author's relentless courage, her unwavering commitment to dismantling conventional thought. I imagined a married woman, defying all moral constraints, running towards her lover. Destructive thought. Destruction is pathetic, sad, and beautiful. The dream of destroying, rebuilding, and perfecting. And even though destruction might never lead to perfection, one must still destroy, for the sake of love. One must start a revolution. Rosa is passionately, desperately in love with Marxism. 12 years ago, one winter. You're the girl from the Sarashina diary. There's nothing more I can say to you. A friend said that to me and left. I had borrowed a book by Lenin from her and returned it without reading it, Did you read it? She asked. I'm sorry. I didn't. We were standing on a bridge overlooking the Nikolai Cathedral. Why? Why not? She was a beautiful woman, a little taller than me, fluent in foreign languages, with a striking resemblance to the Mona Lisa. She looked good in a red beret. I didn't like the color of the cover. That's strange. That's not the real reason, is it? You were afraid of me, weren't you? I wasn't afraid. I couldn't stand the color of the cover. I see, she said sadly. She called me the Sarashina Diary and gave up on me. We stood in silence for a while, looking down at the winter river. Fare you well. If this is an eternal parting, fare you well eternally. Byron, she said, reciting the lines in English, and lightly embraced me. Embarrassed, I murmured, I'm sorry, and walked towards Okanamizu station. When I looked back, she was still standing on the bridge, motionless, gazing at me. I never saw her again. We had attended the same foreign language school, but we went to different regular schools. 12 years have passed since then, and I haven't progressed beyond the Sarashina Diary. What have I been doing all this time? I've never longed for revolution, never even known love. Adults always taught us that revolution and love were foolish and dangerous, and before and during the war, we believed them. But after the defeat, we lost our trust in adults. We began to suspect that the true path to life lay in defying everything they told us. We came to believe that revolution and love were perhaps the best, the most wonderful things in life, so wonderful that adults, out of spite, had lied to us, calling them sour grapes. I want to be certain. Humans were born for love and revolution. The sliding door slid open, and Mother appeared, smiling. You're still awake? Aren't you sleepy? She asked. I glanced at the clock on my desk. It was midnight. No, not at all. I was reading a book about socialism, and it got me all excited. Is that so? Do you have any sake? A drink helps you sleep when you're excited, she said teasingly. But there was something decadent, almost sensual, about her demeanor. October arrived, but instead of crisp, clear autumn days, the weather remained humid and muggy, like the rainy season. Mother's fever persisted, fluctuating between 38 and 39 degrees every afternoon. Then, one morning, I saw something terrifying. Mother's hands were swollen. Mother, who used to say that breakfast was the most delicious meal of the day, now sat in bed, barely able to eat a small bowl of rice porridge. She couldn't tolerate strong smells, and even though I had made matsutake mushroom clear soup for her that day, the aroma of the matsutake seemed to bother her. She brought the bowl to her lips and then gently placed it back on the tray. That's when I saw her hands and was shocked. Her right hand was swollen and round. Mother, is your hand all right? Even her face seemed slightly pale and puffy. It's nothing. It's just a little swelling. Since when has it been swollen? Mother closed her eyes and remained silent. I felt like crying out loud. Those hands, they weren't Mother's hands. They were the hands of some stranger. My mother's hands were slender and delicate. I knew those hands. Gentle hands. Lovely hands. Were those hands gone forever? Her left hand wasn't as swollen yet, but the sight was so distressing that I couldn't bear to look. I averted my gaze and stared at the flower basket in the alcove. Tears welled up in my eyes. I stood up abruptly and went to the dining room. Naoji was there, eating soft-boiled eggs. Even when he was at the villa, he always spent his evenings drinking shochu at Osaki's place. In the mornings, he would appear with a sullen expression, eat 4 or 5 soft-boiled eggs without touching his rice, and then go back upstairs to his room to sleep. Mother's hands are swollen, I said to Naoji, hanging my head. I couldn't continue. I sobbed, my shoulders shaking. Naoji remained silent. I looked up and said, grabbing the edge of the table, it's over, isn't it? Didn't you notice? Swollen like that, it's over. Naoji's face darkened. It's close, yeah. Damn it, this is getting annoying, he said, his mouth twisted in a wry smile. The deterioration seems to be accelerating rapidly. The doc just said it could be any day now. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face. Should we send telegrams? I asked, feeling strangely calm. I talked to Uncle about it, and he said this wasn't the time to be gathering people. Even if they came, this house is too small. It would be rude. And there are no decent inns nearby. We can't reserve 2 or 3 rooms at the hot springs in Nagaka. In other words, We're too poor to invite such important people. Uncle is supposed to come soon, but he's always been stingy, so we can't rely on him for anything. Last night, he completely ignored Mother's illness and lectured me endlessly. No one in the history of the world has ever been reformed by a lecture from a miser. Mother and Uncle, they're worlds apart. It's sickening. But I think you should rely on Uncle from now on. No way. I'd rather be a beggar. You're the one who should rely on him. Tears welled up in my eyes. I have somewhere to go. A marriage proposal? Is it settled? No. Self-sufficiency? A working woman? Don't be ridiculous. Not self-sufficiency either. I'm going to become a revolutionary. Naoji looked at me strangely just then. The nurse Dr. Miyoke had brought with him came to call me. Madam seems to need something. I hurried to the sick room, sat by Mother's bedside, and asked, "What is it?" Mother seemed to want to say something but remained silent. "Water?" I asked. She shook her head slightly. "It wasn't water." After a while, she whispered, "I had a dream." "Really? What kind of dream?" "A snake dream." Her words startled me. "There's a female snake with red stripes on the stepping stone by the veranda. Go and see." My heart pounding with a chilling premonition, I stood up and went to the veranda. Looking through the glass door, I saw a snake basking in the autumn sun, stretched out on the stepping stone. I felt dizzy. "I know you. You're the female snake whose eggs I burned. You've grown a little bigger and older since then, but I recognize you. I've learned my lesson from your revenge, so please go away. Just go away." I stared at the snake, repeating these words in my mind, but it didn't move. For some reason, I didn't want the nurse to see the snake. I stamped my foot loudly and said, in a voice louder than necessary, "There's no snake, Mother. Dreams are just dreams," and glanced at the stepping stone. The snake finally moved, slithering off the stone. "It's over. It's all over," I thought, seeing the snake. For the first time, I felt a sense of resignation. A small black snake had appeared by Father's bedside just before he died, and I had seen snakes coiled around every tree in the garden. Mother no longer had the strength to sit up in bed. She lay dozing, completely reliant on the nurse, barely able to eat. After seeing the snake, I felt a strange sense of peace, a calmness that transcended grief, almost a sense of euphoria. I decided to spend as much time as possible by Mother's side. From the following day, I sat by Mother's bedside, knitting. I was a fast knitter, but my work was clumsy. Mother always took my hands and showed me how to do it properly. That day, too, I wasn't particularly in the mood to knit, but I picked up my knitting needles and yarn, pretending to be absorbed in my work, so as not to seem awkward just sitting there next to Mother. Mother gazed intently at my hands and said, "Are you knitting socks? You should cast on 8 more stitches. Otherwise, they'll be too tight." I fumbled with the needles, just like when I was a child, unable to knit properly no matter how much Mother tried to teach me. I felt embarrassed, nostalgic, and sad. This would be the last time Mother would teach me how to knit. The thought brought tears to my eyes, blurring my vision. Mother, as she lay there, didn't seem to be suffering at all. She hadn't eaten anything since that morning, and the nurse was just moistening her lips with tea-soaked gauze. But she was conscious and would occasionally speak to me calmly. "I hear there was a picture of the emperor in the newspaper. Show it to me again." I held the newspaper above her face. "He looks old." "No, it's just a bad picture. In the previous picture, he looked much younger, almost playful. Perhaps he's happy about these times." "Why?" "Because the emperor has been liberated, too." Mother smiled sadly. After a while, she said, "I want to cry, but I have no more tears left." I suddenly thought that perhaps Mother was happy. Isn't happiness like gold dust, shimmering faintly at the bottom of a river of sorrow? If happiness is that feeling of twilight clarity, that sense of peace that comes after traversing the depths of grief, then perhaps the Emperor, Mother, and we were all happy now. It was a quiet autumn morning. The sun shone softly on the autumn garden. I laid down my knitting and gazed at the glittering sea. "Mother, I've been so naive all this time," I said. There was more I wanted to say, but I stopped, self-conscious about the nurse, who was preparing an intravenous drip in the corner of the room all this time. Mother asked, smiling faintly, as if amused. "So, Are you worldly wise now? I blushed crimson. The world is incomprehensible, Mother murmured, turning her face away, as if talking to herself. I don't understand it. Does anyone truly understand the world? We're all children, forever and always. None of us truly understands anything. But I had to live. I might be a child, but I could no longer afford to be naive and dependent. I had to fight against the world. Oh, Mother, perhaps she was the last of her kind, a woman who could live without fighting or hating, without envy or resentment, ending her life with such beauty and sadness. Those who die are beautiful. To live, to survive, it seemed like a dirty, bloody, vulgar business. I imagined a snake, pregnant, digging a hole in the tatami mat. But there was something I couldn't give up. I would survive, even if it meant being vulgar. I would fight against the world to achieve my goals. As Mother's death became imminent, my romanticism and sentimentality gradually faded, replaced by a cunning, almost ruthless resolve. That afternoon, as I was moistening Mother's lips, a car stopped in front of the gate. Uncle Wada and Aunt Wada had come from Tokyo. Uncle Wada entered the sickroom and sat silently by Mother's bedside. Mother covered the lower half of her face with a handkerchief, gazed at Uncle Wada, and started to cry. But there were no tears. She looked like a doll. Where's Naoji? She asked after a while, looking at me. I went upstairs and found Naoji lying on the sofa in the Western-style room, reading a magazine. Mother is calling for you. Oh, another scene of lament. How can you stand it? You must have nerves of steel. Heartless creatures. I'm so distressed. My spirit is willing, but my flesh is weak. I can't bear to be near Mother. He grumbled as he put on his jacket and followed me downstairs. We sat side by Mother's bedside. She suddenly reached out from under the covers, pointed silently at Naoji, then at me, then turned her face towards Uncle Wada and put her hands together in prayer. Uncle Wada nodded deeply and said, "Yes, I understand. I understand." Mother closed her eyes peacefully and put her hands back under the covers, seemingly reassured. I started to cry, and Naoji sobbed, his head bowed. Just then, Dr. Miyoke arrived from Nagaka and gave Mother an injection. Perhaps relieved to have seen Uncle Wada, Mother said, "Doctor, please, make it quick." The doctor and Uncle Wada exchanged glances and fell silent. Tears glistened in their eyes. I went to the dining room and made kitsune udon, Uncle Wada's favorite, for the doctor, Naoji, Aunt Wada, and myself. I carried the 4 bowls to the Chinese-style room. Then I showed Mother the sandwiches from the Marunouchi Hotel that Uncle Wada had brought as a gift and placed them by her bedside. "You must be busy," Mother whispered. Everyone chatted for a while in the Chinese-style room. Uncle and Aunt Wada said they had to return to Tokyo that evening. Uncle Wada gave me an envelope of money for Mother's care. Dr. Miyoke also decided to leave with his nurse. He gave the attending nurse detailed instructions on how to care for Mother. He said that since Mother was still conscious and her heart wasn't too weak, the injections should keep her comfortable for another 4 or 5 days. They all left for Tokyo in their car. I returned to the living room. Mother smiled at me, a familiar, affectionate smile. "You must be tired," she whispered. Her face seemed lively, almost radiant. She must have been happy to see Uncle Wada, I thought. "No, I'm fine," I replied, smiling brightly. That was our last conversation. 3 hours later, Mother passed away. It was a quiet autumn evening. The nurse checked her pulse. Naoji and I, her only remaining family, were by her side. The beautiful Mother, the last true noblewoman in Japan, was gone. Her face barely changed in death. When Father died, his face had quickly lost its color. But Mother's face remained the same, only her breathing had ceased. It was so subtle, we could barely tell when it had happened. The swelling in her face had subsided since the previous day, and her cheeks were smooth and waxy. Her thin lips were slightly parted, as if in a faint smile. She looked more alluring in death than in life. I thought she resembled Mary in the Pietà. 6. The battle begins. I couldn't wallow in grief forever. I had something I had to fight for. A new morality. No, that sounds hypocritical. Love. That's all. Just as Rosa couldn't live without her new economics, I couldn't live without love. As I prepared to embark on my own battle, Jesus' words to his disciples, as he sent them out into the world to expose the hypocrisy of the religious leaders, moralists, scholars, and authorities, and to proclaim God's true love without hesitation, seemed strangely relevant to my situation. Provide neither gold, nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves, for the workman is worthy of his meat. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues, and ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what ye shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what ye shall speak. For it is not ye that speak, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. But when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another, for verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel, till the Son of Man be come. Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross, and followeth after me, is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. The battle begins. Would Jesus scold me if I swore to follow his teachings, for the sake of love? I don't understand why love is good and passion is bad. They seem like the same thing to me. For the sake of an incomprehensible love, for the sake of passion, for the sake of its sadness, him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Oh, I want to claim that is me. With Uncle Wada's help, we held a private funeral for mother in Aizu, and a formal funeral in Tokyo. After that, Naoji and I returned to the villa in Aizu and resumed our awkward, silent coexistence. Naoji took all of mother's jewelry, claiming it was capital for his publishing company. Whenever he grew tired of carousing in Tokyo, he would return to the villa, his face pale and haggard, like an invalid. He would sleep, and sometimes, he would bring a young dancer-like woman with him. He seemed slightly embarrassed, so I said, "Can I go to Tokyo? I want to visit a friend. I'll be staying for 2 or 3 nights, so you can stay here and look after the house. You can ask her to cook for you." I seized the opportunity, taking advantage of Naoji's weakness. Wise as a serpent, I packed my makeup and some bread in my bag and left for Tokyo, ostensibly to visit a friend, but in reality, to see him. Naoji had previously mentioned that the man's new post-war residence was about a 20-minute walk from the north exit of Ogikubo Station. It was a cold, windy day. By the time I arrived at Ogikubo Station, dusk was already falling. I stopped passers-by, gave them the man's address, and asked for directions. I wandered through the dark suburban streets for nearly an hour, feeling increasingly anxious. Tears welled up in my eyes. I stumbled on a loose stone on the gravel road, and the strap of my Jita sandal snapped. I stood there, wondering what to do, when I noticed a nameplate on a 2-unit apartment building, faintly visible in the twilight. It seemed to say Yuhara. I hurried towards the entrance, 1 foot bare, and looked closely at the nameplate. It indeed read Jiro Yuhara. The house was dark. I hesitated for a moment, then, with the desperation of someone about to jump into a river, I leaned against the latticed sliding door and called softly, "Excuse me. Mr. Yuhara?" I ran my fingers along the lattice. There was a reply. But it was a woman's voice. The door slid open, and a woman, 3 or 4 years older than me, with an old-fashioned, refined air, appeared in the darkness of the entranceway. She smiled faintly and asked, "Who is it?" There was no hostility or suspicion in her voice. Well, I couldn't bring myself to tell her my name. I felt strangely ashamed of my love, especially in front of this woman. I stammered almost abjectly, Is he here?" "I'm afraid not," she replied, looking at me with pity. But, he's usually at. Far from here? No, she said, covering her mouth with her hand, a smile playing on her lips. This is Ogikubo. If you go to Shiraishi, the Odin restaurant in front of the station, they'll probably be able to tell you where he is. My heart leaped. Oh, I see. Oh dear, your sandal. She invited me inside. I sat on the raised wooden platform at the entrance while she gave me a small leather strap, the kind used for quick repairs of broken Jita straps. As I fixed my sandal, she brought a candle to the entrance. Both of our light bulbs have burned out, and these days, light bulbs are so expensive and fragile. My husband would buy new ones, but he hasn't been home for 2 nights. We've been going to bed early for 3 nights now, with no money to even light a lamp, she said with a cheerful, carefree smile. Behind her stood a slender girl of 12 or 13, with large, wary eyes, the enemy. I didn't want to think of her that way, but this woman and her daughter would surely come to see me as their enemy one day. The thought dampened my passion, and I felt a wave of desolation wash over me as I finished fixing my sandal. I stood up, clapped my hands together to dust them off, and felt a sudden urge to run into the living room, embrace the woman in the darkness, and cry. But I imagined how pathetic and awkward I would look, and I stopped myself. Thank you, I said, bowing deeply, and stepped outside. The cold wind stung my face. The battle begins. Love. Longing. Yearning. True love. True affection. True yearning. His wife was a kind and gentle woman, a rare find. Her daughter was beautiful, too. But even if I were standing before God's judgment, I wouldn't feel the slightest shame. Humans were born for love and revolution. God wouldn't punish me for this. I've done nothing wrong. I truly love him, so I'll proudly pursue him, even if it means sleeping outdoors for 2 or 3 nights, until I see him again. I easily found Shiraishi, the Odin restaurant in front of the station. But he wasn't there. He's probably in Asagaya. Go straight from the north exit of Asagaya station. Let's see, about 1.5 blocks? There's a hardware store. Turn right there, and after half a block, you'll find a small restaurant called Yanaji. He's been spending a lot of time with the proprietress of Yanaji lately. They're quite an item. I went to the station, bought a ticket, took the Chuo line towards Tokyo, got off at Asagaya, walked out the north exit, walked about 1.5 blocks, turned right at the hardware store, and after half a block, I found Yanaji. It was quiet. He just left. He was with a group of people, and they said they were going to Kaidori, a bar in Nishiojukubo, for an all-nighter. She was younger than me, calm, elegant, and kind. Was this the proprietress, the woman he was having an affair with, Kaidori? Where in Nishiojukubo? I felt a pang of loneliness, and tears threatened to spill. I wondered if I was going mad. I'm not sure, but I think it's near the south exit of Nishiojukubo station, on the left side. You could ask at the police box. He's quite the carouser. He might be somewhere else before going to Kaidori. I'll go to Kaidori. Thank you. Goodbye. Backtracking again. I took the Chuo line from Asagaya towards Tachikawa, got off at Nishiojukubo, walked out the south exit, and wandered around in the cold wind. I found a police box and asked for directions to Kaidori. I followed their instructions, almost running through the dark streets, and finally found the blue lantern of Kaidori. I opened the latticed door without hesitation. There was an earthen floor entrance, then a small room about 6 tatami mats in size, filled with cigarette smoke. About 10 people were sitting around a large table, drinking and making a racket. 3 young women were among them, smoking and drinking. I stood in the entrance, scanning the room, and I found him. A dreamlike feeling came over me. 6 years. He was a completely different person. Was this him? My rainbow, MC, the man I lived for? 6 years. His unruly hair was the same, but it had thinned and turned a reddish brown. His face was pale and puffy, the rims of his eyes red and inflamed. He was missing a front tooth and kept moving his mouth, like an old monkey huddled in the corner of the room. One of the young women noticed me and signaled to Yuhara with her eyes. He craned his long neck, looked at me without any expression, and motioned with his chin for me to come in. The group, seemingly uninterested in me, continued their boisterous revelry. They shifted slightly, making room for me next to Yuhara. I sat down silently. Yuhara filled my glass to the brim with sake, refilled his own glass, and said in a hoarse voice, "Cheers." Our glasses clinked weakly, a sad, hollow sound. Guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish, someone sang, and another person echoed, guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish. They clinked their glasses loudly and drank. Guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish. Guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish. The nonsensical song spread around the table, accompanied by the clinking of glasses and cheers. They seemed to be using the silly rhythm and forced camaraderie to drown their sorrows. "Well, excuse me," someone said, stood up unsteadily, and left. A new arrival entered, gave Yuhara a cursory nod, and joined the group. "Yuhara, that, you know, that apart, how should I say it? Is it or a man asked, leaning forward. I recognized him. It was Fujita, the stage actor. "It's The sake at Kaidori isn't cheap, you know," Yuhara replied. "Always talking about money." A young woman said, "2 sparrows for a penny, is that expensive or cheap?" A young man asked, "There's also the saying, every penny must be repaid. And then there's that complicated parable about the talents, 5 talents, 2 talents, 1 talent. Christ seems to be quite meticulous about accounts," another man said, "and he was a drinker, too. I always wondered why there were so many parables about wine in the Bible. And sure enough, it says, 'Behold, a man gluttonous, and a winebibber.' Not just a drinker, but a winebibber. He must have been quite the heavy drinker. Probably drank a show or more at a time," another man said. "Enough, enough. Don't use Jesus as an excuse for your moral cowardice. Chi, let's drink. Guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish." Yuhara clinked glasses with the youngest and most beautiful of the women, Chi, and drank deeply. Sake dribbled from the corner of his mouth, wetting his chin. He wiped it roughly with the back of his hand and then sneezed violently, 5 or 6 times in a row. I quietly stood up and went to the next room. I asked the pale, sickly-looking proprietress where the restroom was. On my way back, Chi, the young woman, was standing there, as if waiting for me. "Are you hungry?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Yes, but I brought some bread with me." "We don't have much to offer," the proprietress said languidly, leaning against the brazier, still sitting sideways. "You can eat in here. You won't get anything to eat in there with those drunkards. Sit down, here. Chico, join us." Chi and I sat side by the brazier, warming our hands. "Here's a blanket. It's getting cold, isn't it? Would you like a drink?" The proprietress poured some sake from a tokuri into her own teacup, then filled 2 other teacups. The 3 of us drank in silence. "You all seem to be quite strong drinkers," the proprietress said, her voice strangely subdued. The sliding door rattled open, and a young man's voice called, "Mr. Yuhara, I brought it. Our president is a tough negotiator. He insisted on 2,000 yen, but I managed to get him down to 1,000. A check?" Yuhara's hoarse voice asked. "No, cash." "I'm sorry." "Oh well, I'll write a receipt." The guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish song continued unabated in the next room. "Where's Nao?" the proprietress asked Chi with a serious expression. Her question startled me. "I don't know. I'm not his keeper," Chi replied, flustered, her face flushing prettily. "Did something happen between him and Yuhara lately? They used to be inseparable. He seems to prefer dancing these days. He probably has a dancer girlfriend now. Nao, drinking and women, that's a bad combination. He learned it from Yuhara. But Nao is worse. A spoiled little rich boy like him." "Excuse me," I interrupted, smiling. I felt it would be rude to remain silent. "I'm Naoji's older sister." The proprietress looked at me in surprise, but Chi said calmly, "You do resemble him. When I saw you standing in the entrance, I thought you were Nao." "Is that so?" the proprietress said, her tone changing. "What brings you to such a disreputable place? And, you and Yuhara, have you known each other for a while?" "Yes, we met 6 years ago," I faltered, hanging my head. Tears threatened to spill. "Here you are," the waitress said, bringing a plate of udon noodles. "Eat while it's hot," the proprietress said. "Thank you." I buried my face in the steam rising from the noodles and slurped them down, feeling as if I were experiencing the depths of human loneliness. Yuhara entered the room, humming guillotine, guillotine, swish, swish, sat down cross-legged beside me, and silently handed the proprietress a large envelope. "Don't think you can get away with this," the proprietress said, tucking the envelope into the drawer of the brazier without looking inside. "I'll bring the rest. I'll pay the rest next year." Honestly, 10,000 yen. How many light bulbs could she buy with that? I could live comfortably for a year with that much money. Oh, something was wrong with these people. But perhaps, like me and my love, they had no other way to survive. If one must live, if one must somehow endure this life, then perhaps their way of coping wasn't so reprehensible after all. Living. What a relentless, exhausting endeavor it was anyway. A man's voice said from the next room, "If you want to live in Tokyo these days, you have to be able to say konnichiwa with a straight face. Demanding virtues like gravitas and sincerity from us now is like pulling the chair out from under someone about to hang themselves. Gravitas? Sincerity? Sure. We wouldn't survive. If you can't say konnichiwa lightly, you only have 3 options: return to farming, commit suicide, or become a kept man. And for those poor souls who can't even do that," another man said, "there's only one last resort: leeching off Yuhara gyro and drinking themselves into oblivion. Guillotine, swish, swish. Guillotine, swish, swish. You don't have a place to stay, do you?" Yuhara murmured, as if talking to himself. "Me?" I felt a snake rearing its head within me. Hostility. I tensed. "Can you sleep on the floor with everyone else? It's cold." "That's impossible," the proprietress interjected. "Poor thing." Yuhara clicked his tongue. "Then she shouldn't have come here." I remained silent. He had definitely read my letters. And I knew, from the tone of his voice, that he loved me more than anyone else. It can't be helped. "I'll ask Mr. Fukui if he can put her up for the night." "Chi, can you take her there?" "No, it's dangerous for a woman to walk alone at night. This is troublesome." Please put her jita in the kitchen. I'll take her home." It was late at night. The wind had died down, and the sky was filled with stars. As we walked side by side, I said, "I can sleep anywhere. Even on the floor." Yuhara murmured sleepily. "You wanted to be alone with me, didn't you?" I said, laughing. "That's why I hate women," he said, twisting his mouth in a wry smile. I felt a surge of warmth, knowing he cared for me deeply. "You drink a lot, don't you? Every night?" "Yes, every day. Starting in the morning." "Do you enjoy it?" "It tastes awful." His words sent a chill down my spine. "And your work?" "It's no good. Everything I write seems absurd, and just unbearably sad. The twilight of life. The twilight of art. The twilight of humanity." That sounds pretentious, doesn't it? "Utrillo," I said, almost unconsciously. "Ah, Utrillo. He's still alive, I hear. A ghost of alcohol. A living corpse. His paintings from the past 10 years are all vulgar and awful. Not just Utrillo, right? All the other masters, too." "Yes, decline. But the new buds are withering, too. Frost. It's as if an untimely frost has descended upon the world." Yuhara lightly put his arm around my shoulder, and my body was enveloped in the sleeve of his double-breasted overcoat. I didn't resist. I leaned against him and we walked slowly. The branches of the trees lining the street, bare branches, devoid of leaves, reaching starkly towards the night sky. "Tree branches are beautiful, aren't they?" I murmured. "Yes, the harmony of the blossoms and the dark branches," he replied, sounding slightly flustered. "No, I like them like this, bare. They're still alive, aren't they? Not dead branches. Only nature doesn't decline," he said, and then sneezed violently, repeatedly. "Do you have a cold?" No, nothing like that. It's a quirk of mine. When I reach my drinking limit, I start sneezing like this. It's like a barometer of intoxication. And love. What? Is there someone you're in love with? Someone who brings you to your limit? Don't tease me. Women are all the same. Complicated creatures. Guillotine, swish, swish. Actually, there is someone, or half a someone, perhaps. Did you read my letters? Yes. And your reply? I dislike aristocrats. There's always something unbearably haughty about them. Your brother, Nao, is a fine man, as aristocrats go, but sometimes, he can be surprisingly impertinent. I'm a farmer's son, you see. Whenever I walk by a stream like this, I remember fishing for crucian carp and scooping up killifish in the stream near my childhood home. It always moves me. We were walking along a path beside a small stream, its gentle murmur barely audible in the darkness. But you aristocrats, you not only fail to understand our sentiments, you despise them. What about Turgenev? He was an aristocrat. That's why I dislike him. But A Sportsman's Sketches. Yes, that one is not bad. It's filled with rural sentiments. Let's compromise and call him a country gentleman. I'm a country bumpkin now, too. I work in a vegetable garden. A poor country woman. Do you still love me? He asked abruptly. His face suddenly approached mine, and I was kissed fiercely, a kiss that reeked of lust. I received the kiss, tears streaming down my face. Bitter tears of humiliation and frustration. We resumed walking. I messed up. I fell for you, he said, laughing, but I couldn't laugh. I frowned and pursed my lips. It can't be helped. That's how I felt. I realized I was shuffling along, dragging my jita. I messed up, he repeated. Shall we see this through to the end? How dramatic. He punched me lightly on the shoulder and then sneezed violently. Mr. Fukui's house. Everyone seemed to be asleep. Telegram. Telegram. Mr. Fukui, telegram. Yuhara shouted, banging on the front door. Yuhara, a man's voice called from inside, the one and only. I've come to request lodging for the prince and princess. With this cold, I can't stop sneezing. It's turning our romantic pilgrimage into a comedy. The door opened. A small, balding man in his 50s, wearing flamboyant pajamas, greeted us with a shy smile. Please, Yuhara said, stepping inside without taking off his coat. It's freezing in the atelier. I'll take the second floor. Come on. He took my hand, led me down the hallway to the staircase, and we climbed up to a dark room. He flicked a switch in the corner. This looks like a room in a restaurant. Yes, nouveau riche taste. But it's too good for that hack painter. He's so lucky, he didn't even lose his house in the air raids. I have to take advantage of this. Now, let's sleep, let's sleep. He opened a closet, took out futons as if he were at home, spread them on the floor, and said, sleep here. I'm going home. I'll come back for you in the morning. The toilet is right next to the staircase, downstairs. He clattered down the stairs and disappeared. I flicked the switch, turning off the light, took off my velvet coat made from fabric father had brought back from abroad, loosened my obi, and lay down in my kimono. Exhausted and slightly drunk, I quickly dozed off. He was lying beside me. I resisted silently, desperately, for nearly an hour. Then, feeling a sudden pang of pity, I gave up. You wouldn't be satisfied otherwise, would you? Something like that. Are you ill? Have you been coughing up blood? How did you know? I had a rather bad episode recently, but I haven't told anyone. You smell the same way Mother did before she died. I'm drinking myself to death. Life is just unbearably sad. It's not just loneliness or desolation, it's sadness. When you hear sighs of despair emanating from the walls around you, you know there can be no such thing as personal happiness. When you realize that you'll never find happiness or glory in this life, how do you feel? Effort, it's all just fodder for the starving beasts. There's too much suffering in this world. Am I being dramatic? No. Love is all that matters. Just like you wrote in your letters. Yes. But my love was gone. Dawn broke. As the room gradually brightened, I gazed at the man sleeping beside me. His face was like that of a dying man. A face ravaged by exhaustion, the face of a victim. A noble victim. My man. My rainbow. My child. A hateful man. A deceitful man, and yet, his face seemed more beautiful than any other in the world. I felt a resurgence of love, my heart pounding. I stroked his hair and kissed him, the sad, sad consummation of my love. Yuhara embraced me, his eyes closed, and murmured, I was jealous, you see. Because I'm a farmer's son. I would never leave him again. I'm happy now. Even if I hear sighs of despair emanating from the walls, my happiness is at its limit. I'm so happy I could sneeze. Yuhara chuckled softly. But, it's too late, isn't it? Twilight. It's morning. Naoji had committed suicide that morning. 7. Naoji's suicide note. Sister. I can't do this anymore. I'm going ahead. I don't understand why I have to live. Those who want to live should live. Humans have the right to live, and they should also have the right to die. This isn't some new or radical idea. It's a simple, primitive truth. People are just afraid to admit it openly. Those who want to live should fight to survive, no matter what. That's admirable, and perhaps that's where true human glory lies. But dying isn't a sin either. I, this weed, cannot thrive in this world's air and sunlight. There's something missing in me. Something lacking. I've been living, barely. When I entered high school, I met friends from a completely different class, strong, resilient weeds. I felt pressured to compete, to keep up with them, so I turned to drugs, becoming half-mad in my resistance. Then, in the army, I used opium again as a last resort to survive. You probably wouldn't understand. I wanted to be vulgar. I wanted to be strong, even violent. I thought it was the only way to become one of them, a friend of the masses. Alcohol wasn't enough. I needed to be constantly dizzy, disoriented. And for that, there was nothing but drugs. I had to forget my family. I had to rebel against my father's blood. I had to reject mother's kindness. I had to be cold to you. I thought that was the only way to gain entry to their world, the world of the masses. I became vulgar. I started using vulgar language. But it was mostly, no, 60% of it was just an act. A clumsy charade. To them, I was still a pretentious, effete aristocrat. They wouldn't truly accept me, wouldn't let me into their circle. But I can no longer return to the world I abandoned. Even if 60% of my vulgarity is an act, the remaining 40% is real. I can no longer tolerate the unbearable refinement of the so-called upper class. And those esteemed gentlemen and ladies would be appalled by my uncouth behavior and banish me immediately. I can't return to the world I abandoned, and the masses only offer me a front-row seat to their thinly veiled contempt. Perhaps weeds like me, with weak vitality and inherent flaws, are destined to wither and die, regardless of ideology or anything else. But I have something to say. I feel a sense of injustice. All men are created equal. Is that an ideology? I don't think the person who coined that phrase was a religious leader, philosopher, or artist. It's a phrase that originated in taverns, among the masses. Like maggots breeding, it emerged from somewhere, no one knows who said it first, and it spread throughout the world, making everything awkward and uncomfortable. This strange phrase has nothing to do with democracy or Marxism. It's something an ugly man says to a handsome man in a tavern. It's just resentment. Envy. It's not an ideology, but this drunken outburst, disguised as a profound thought, has infiltrated the minds of the masses. It has become entangled with political and economic ideologies, tainting them with its vulgarity. Even Mephistopheles would have hesitated to pass off such a preposterous statement as an ideology. It would have gone against his conscience. All men are created equal. What a pathetic phrase. It degrades others and oneself, encouraging a sense of worthlessness, the abandonment of all effort. Marxism asserts the superiority of the working class. It doesn't say all men are created equal. Democracy asserts the dignity of the individual. It doesn't say all men are created equal. Only the common man says that. No matter how much you put on airs, we're all the same. Why the same? Why not superior? The revenge of the slave mentality. But this phrase is so vulgar, so insidious. It makes people afraid. It corrupts all ideologies. It mocks effort, denies happiness, defiles beauty, drags down glory. I believe this strange phrase is the root of the so-called anxiety of the age. I, too, have been intimidated by this phrase, trembling with fear, feeling awkward and out of place, constantly anxious and restless. I sought temporary solace in alcohol and drugs, and I became a mess. I'm weak. A flawed weed. Someone might laugh and say, "Oh, come on, you just like to play. You're a lazy, lustful hedonist." And I used to just blush and awkwardly agree. But now, as I face death, I want to protest, sister. Please believe me. I never enjoyed playing. Perhaps I'm impotent to pleasure. I just wanted to escape from my shadow, the shadow of my aristocratic upbringing. That's why I went mad, indulged in debauchery, and self-destructed, sister. Are we guilty of something? Is it a sin to be born an aristocrat? Just because we were born into a certain family, must we forever live in shame and apology, like relatives of Judas? I should have died sooner. But there was one thing that kept me alive: mother's love. I couldn't die while she was still alive. Humans have the right to live freely and the right to die whenever they choose. But I believe that while one's mother is alive, the right to die should be reserved. Because to die would be to kill one's mother, too. Now, no one will grieve my death to the point of illness. No. Sister, I know. I know how much you'll grieve for me. No, let's not indulge in sentimental hypocrisy. You'll surely cry when you hear of my death, but if you consider my suffering, the misery of my existence, and the joy of my final liberation, your sadness will gradually fade, I believe. Those who criticize my suicide, who say I should have struggled to survive, those who offer empty words of judgment without offering any help, they are the kind of great men who would cheerfully suggest that the emperor open a fruit stand, sister. It's better for me to die. I lack the ability to live. I can't fight with people over money. I can't even bring myself to leech off others. Even when I went out with Yuhara, I always paid my share. Yuhara hated that, calling it aristocratic stinginess, but it wasn't pride that made me pay. I couldn't bear to eat and drink, to sleep with women, using money earned by Yuhara's work. It felt wrong, somehow. It's not as simple as saying I respected his work. I don't fully understand it myself. I can't stand being treated by others, especially with money earned by their own hard work. It's too painful, too agonizing, so I kept taking money and things from our family, causing you and mother so much grief. And I didn't even enjoy it. The publishing company, it was just a pretense, a way to save face. I wasn't serious about it. Even if I were, a man like me, who can't even bring himself to be treated by others, could never succeed in business. I'm not that stupid, sister. We're poor now. I always wanted to treat others while I was alive, but now I've become someone who has to be treated by others to survive, sister. Why should I continue living? It's over. I'm going to die. I have a drug that will make it easy. I obtained it during the war. You are beautiful. I was always proud of my beautiful mother and sister, and you're intelligent, so I'm not worried about you. I don't even have the right to worry. It would be like a thief worrying about his victim. I would just be ashamed. I believe you'll find a husband, have children, and live comfortably, relying on him, sister. I have a secret. I've kept it hidden for so long, even during the war. I thought about her constantly, dreamed of her, and woke up in tears more times than I can count. Her name. I could never tell anyone. I'm dying now, so I thought, perhaps I should tell you, at least. But it's too frightening. I can't say her name, but if I died with this secret locked away in my heart, untold to anyone, I feel, even after my body is cremated, a part of me, my heart perhaps, would remain unburned, reeking of that secret. The thought is unbearable, so I'll tell you, indirectly, vaguely, like a fiction. But it's not really fiction. You'll know who I'm talking about. It's just a change of names. You know her, you should know her, but you've probably never met her. She's a little older than you. She has single eyelids, the corners of her eyes slightly upturned. She never perms her hair. She always wears it pulled back tightly, a simple, unassuming hairstyle. Her clothes are plain, but always neat and clean. She's the wife of a middle-aged painter who recently became famous for his new, post-war style. He's a violent, dissolute man, but she always maintains a calm, gentle smile. I stood up and said, "Well then, I'll take my leave." She stood up, too, and walked towards me without hesitation, her eyes meeting mine. "Why?" she asked in a normal voice, tilting her head slightly, as if puzzled. She looked into my eyes. Usually, I avert my gaze when a woman looks at me directly, but that time, I felt no shame. Our faces were only inches apart, and for a long, comfortable moment, perhaps 60 seconds or more, I gazed into her eyes. Then I smiled involuntarily. "Well, I'll be back soon," she said, her expression serious. I suddenly thought, this is what true honesty looks like. It wasn't the stern, imposing virtue preached in ethics textbooks. True honesty, wasn't it supposed to be something lovely and unassuming like this? "I'll come again," I said yes. It was a perfectly ordinary conversation. One summer afternoon, I visited the painter's apartment. He wasn't home, but his wife said he would be back soon and invited me in. I waited for about 30 minutes, reading magazines, but he didn't return, so I stood up and took my leave. That's all there was to it. But I fell in love with her eyes that day. Noble, is that the right word? Among the aristocrats I knew, except for Mother, no one could express such unguarded honesty in their eyes. Then, one winter evening, I was struck by her profile. I was at the painter's apartment again, drinking with him since morning, sitting at the kotatsu, badmouthing Japan's so-called cultural elite, laughing. The painter passed out, snoring loudly. I was lying down, dozing off, when I felt a blanket being placed over me. I opened my eyes slightly and saw the clear, pale blue winter sky of Tokyo. She was sitting by the window, holding her daughter, gazing out at something in the distance. Her profile, silhouetted against the pale blue sky, was as sharply defined as a Renaissance portrait. Her kindness in covering me with the blanket, it wasn't flirtatious or suggestive. It was a simple, unassuming gesture of human compassion, almost unconscious, like something straight out of a painting. That I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by a yearning so intense it felt like madness. Tears welled up and spilled from beneath my eyelids. I pulled the blanket over my head. "Sister." At first, I visited the painter because I was fascinated by his unique style, the passionate intensity of his work. But as I got to know him better, I became disillusioned by his ignorance, his vulgarity, his recklessness. And at the same time, I became increasingly drawn to his wife's inner beauty, her genuine affection. I longed to see her, and that's why I kept visiting the painter's apartment. That I now believe that if there's any trace of nobility in the painter's work, it's a reflection of his wife's gentle heart. The painter, I can say this now, he's just a drunken, lecherous, shrewd businessman. He paints whatever nonsense comes to mind, capitalizing on trends, putting on airs, and selling his work at exorbitant prices. He's just a country bumpkin with an inflated ego, a shrewd businessman. I doubt he understands anything about art, whether it's by foreign or Japanese artists. He probably doesn't even understand his own paintings. He just paints frantically, driven by his desire for money to fund his debauchery. And what's even more astonishing is that he seems to have no doubt, shame, or fear about his own absurdity. He's just smug. Since he doesn't understand his own paintings, he can't possibly appreciate the work of others. He just criticizes everything, his decadent lifestyle. He talks about suffering and anguish, but in reality, he's just a foolish country bumpkin who came to the big city, achieved unexpected success, and is now reveling in his good fortune. I once said to him, "When all your friends are idling and playing, it feels awkward and embarrassing to be the only one studying. So even if you don't feel like it, you join in and play along." He replied, "Is that what you call aristocratic temperament? How pathetic. When I see other people having fun, I think, I'd be missing out if I didn't join in, so I join in and have fun." I felt a deep contempt for him at that moment. There was no anguish in his dissipation. He was actually proud of his foolish indulgences. A true idiot, a hedonist. But it's pointless to continue badmouthing the painter. It has nothing to do with you, sister. And even though I remember our long acquaintance with fondness and feel a sudden urge to see him again, I don't hate him. He's a lonely man, and he has many good qualities. I won't say anything more. I just wanted you to know that I yearned for his wife, and it tormented me. So, sister, please don't tell anyone about this. You don't need to champion my unrequited love. Just know, and think to yourself, "Oh, I see." And if I may be even more greedy, I hope that my shameful confession will help you understand, even a little, the suffering of my life. It would bring me great comfort. I once dreamed that I was holding her hand. And I knew, in my dream, that she had loved me for a long time, too. Even after I woke up, the warmth of her fingers lingered in my palm. I thought, I should be content with this, and give up. It wasn't morality that held me back. It was the painter. He was practically a madman, and I was terrified of him. I tried to forget her, to extinguish the flames in my heart, and I desperately sought solace in the arms of other women, so recklessly that even the painter frowned in disapproval. But it was no use. I'm the kind of man who can only love one woman. I can say this with certainty, I've never been attracted to any of her other female friends' sister. Let me write this just once, before I die. Sugar. That's her name. I brought that dancer, she's fundamentally stupid, to the villa yesterday, but I didn't intend to die then. I knew I would die soon, but I didn't come here yesterday with the intention of killing myself. She had been pestering me to take her on a trip, and I was tired of carousing in Tokyo, so I thought it might be nice to spend a few days at the villa with her. I knew you weren't feeling well, but I came anyway. And then, you left for Tokyo to visit your friend, and I suddenly thought, now's my chance. I've always wanted to die in the back room of our house in Nishikatamakai. I didn't want to die on the street or in a field, my body gawked at by strangers. But that house is gone now, sold to someone else. I thought I would have to die in this villa, but I couldn't bring myself to do it with you here. I couldn't bear the thought of you finding my body, the shock and terror you would experience, and then, what an opportunity. You were gone, and that clueless dancer would be the one to find me. Last night, we drank together, and I sent her to the Western-style room upstairs. I lay down alone in the living room, where Mother died, and started writing this pathetic note. Sister, I have no foundation to stand on. Goodbye. In the end, my death is a natural one. No one can die from ideology alone. One last, awkward request. The hemp kimono that Mother left behind, the one you altered for me to wear next summer, please put it in my coffin. I wanted to wear it. Dawn is breaking. Thank you for everything. Goodbye. I'm completely sober now. I'm dying sober. Goodbye again, sister. I am an aristocrat. 8. A dream. Everyone is leaving me. After Naoji's funeral, I lived alone in the winter villa for a month. Then, I wrote what would probably be my last letter to him. My heart as cold and still as water. It seems you've abandoned me, too. No, you're simply forgetting me, but I'm happy. It seems. I'm going to have a baby. I feel as if I've lost everything, but this small life growing inside me is the source of my solitary smile. I don't consider it a shameful mistake. I've finally understood why there are wars and peace, trade and unions, politics, in this world. You don't know, do you? That's why you're still unhappy. I'll tell you. It's so that women can bear children. I never expected anything from you. Not your character, not your responsibility, nothing. My only concern was the fulfillment of my passionate pursuit. And now that my desire has been fulfilled, my heart is as still as a forest pool. I believe I've won. If Mary were to bear a child not fathered by her husband, and if she felt no shame, she would become the mother of God. I have the satisfaction of having defied conventional morality and brought a new life into this world. You're probably still chanting guillotine, guillotine, drinking with gentlemen and ladies, continuing your decadent lifestyle. But I won't tell you to stop. That, too, is your way of fighting. I no longer want to tell you to stop drinking, to take care of your health, to live a long life and create great works. Such empty platitudes are meaningless now. Perhaps future generations will be more grateful to those who lived a life of so-called debauchery, risking their lives in defiance of convention, than to those who created great works. Victims. Victims of a transitional period in morality. Perhaps that's what we both are. Where does revolution truly take place? At least in our world, conventional morality remains unchanged, obstructing our path. The waves on the surface of the sea might be turbulent, but the deep ocean currents, they remain undisturbed, indifferent to revolution. But I believe I've managed to push back against conventional morality, at least in this first battle. And now, with my child, I will fight the second and third battles, bearing and raising the child of the man I love. That is the culmination of my moral revolution. Even if you forget me, even if you drink yourself to death, I think I can live, for the sake of completing my revolution. You might be a flawed human being, as I've heard from others, but you gave me strength. You painted the rainbow of revolution in my heart. You gave me a purpose in life. I'm proud of you, and I will teach my child to be proud of you, too. An illegitimate child and its mother, but we will defy conventional morality and live like the sun. Please, continue your own battle. The revolution, it hasn't truly begun. It seems, we need many more precious, noble sacrifices to end this world. The most beautiful are the victims. There was another small victim, Yuhara. I have nothing more to ask of you. But for the sake of this small victim, I have one last request, one last indulgence, that I want your wife to hold my child, just once. And I will say to her, this is the child Naoji secretly fathered with another woman. I can't explain why I want to do this. I don't even understand it myself. But I must. For the sake of that small victim, Naoji, I must. Will you grant me this request? Even if it displeases you, please indulge me. Consider it the last, petty act of spite from a woman abandoned and forgotten at M.C. My Comedian, February the 7th, 1947.